Halton as we know it today
is rich in the history and modern traditions
of many First Nations and the Métis.
From the lands of the Anishinaabe
to the Attawandaron,
the Haudenosaunee,
and the Métis.
These lands surrounding the Great Lake
are steeped in Indigenous history.
As we gather today
on these treaty lands,
our Catholic social teachings
call us in solidarity
with our Indigenous brothers and sisters
to honor and respect
the four directions:
lands, waters, plants, animals, and ancestors
that walked before us.
All these wonderful elements of creation exist,
gifted to us by our Creator God.
We acknowledge and thank
the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation
for being stewards of this traditional territory.
had an P or not, they did really well. Every single student succeeded. And like Josie said, we did include life skills as well. And I think with STEAM, this is the key to equity, inclusion, and student success.
Thank you very much. We hope to come back to give you more updates in the future.
Thank you for the opportunity to come here tonight. I'm really fond of saying Our Lady of Victory. We're small and we're mighty. And I have some of the mightiest here with me. And as I sat here in the gallery, I realized 6 of those 8 educators I had the privilege of working with as their administrator at one point in their careers. And if you heard a lot of laughter out there, we apologize. We were having a really good time. And I had said to them, you know, my approach with this team of educators, Victoria Perrick, Natasha Jones, Olivia Pellegrino. Victoria is a primary teacher. Natasha is the set in our gifted self-contained 5-6. And Olivia is the set in our grade 7-8 gifted class. And I talked to them about the Ds. We dare to disturb, disrupt. We dare to dismantle. We dare to develop and distribute leadership at Our Lady of Victory. And in doing so, we dare to innovate. And here they are to tell you all about innovation and excellence in teaching at Our Lady of Victory. Thank you for the opportunity.
Alrighty. So I'm going to start us off just by talking about where we began and a bit about our journey that got us to where we are right now. I think it's important to note that Our Lady of Victory is in a community that's considered to be low income. So we have a wide variety of students who are coming into our building from our local community and in our self-contained classrooms. Last year, we were named one of the pilot schools for the STEAM space. So you can see on the left-hand side that what that brought us to was a kind of bare bones space that would need a little bit of inspiration. So this year, that was our goal, was to just bring student life into the space. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a bit of where we are now. All of this is student designed, student created, and student imagined. The Lego wall was a passion project by one of the students in Natasha's classes. And you can see we have a green screen in our AV room, which is our repurposed library office. We are dealing with a very small space, so we had to get crafty with how we used it while keeping safety in mind and inclusion in mind, because we have a variety of students who move in unique ways. So we had to make sure that the space was accessible to everyone. So one of the features that we added to the space this year was retractable cords from the ceiling, just to make sure that there was nothing in the way on the floor. So that's safe for all of our students, but in particular with students who have gross motor needs. Beyond that, we were also talking to staff consistently throughout this process to find out what their needs were in addition to what the students' needs were, because they're going to be the ones who are delivering the programming and guiding the use of the space. So we found out what kind of resources everyone would need. We sent out many Google forms, some of which went answered and some of which went unanswered, but that's part of the process. We have been in charge of tracking and keeping stock on consumables, and also maintaining technology and working closely with IT to make sure that we're up to date on applications and other tech supplies that we would need to be successful in the space. And move on. So one of those pieces in communicating with staff was providing them options and entry points for their curriculum delivery. So what you can see here is just one example. We made a slide like this for every grade from K to 8, providing entry points that seemed approachable to staff, because all of this can be very overwhelming, especially when we have many subjects to teach in the day. So we thought it would be best to sort of build a resource bank for them to make it easy for them to have access to this. With that being said, we also kept in mind a variety of unplugged options. So using no tech if people didn't feel comfortable with that, but still wanted an entry point, and also high tech options. So we went through and picked out specific curriculum expectations from science and math and connected them in this document that you can see here. Everything's hyperlinked, and we created lesson plans, handouts, and assessment templates as well, because in adapting in a STEAM environment, you're also changing the way that you assess. And we saw great success with that this year. And with that being said, we couldn't have done it without principal support and having somebody like Michelle who is willing to take a risk and go with all of the crazy ideas that we have to present to her. So we're grateful for that.
So the results of all of this, so a lot of the events that we did are pictured here. So we did many different innovation projects. We did lots of fun things between grades and divisions, and also between the classrooms. So OLV is unique in that we have contained classes, the gifted and the essential skills. And just STEAM allows for those groups to come together. That's accessible. So on the right, you can see with the balloons, you might be wondering, it wasn't a birthday. It was my class in Victoria's. She teaches grade 1, I have 5-6, with Ozo bots, which are codable robots. We attached balloons via helium tank that we brought in, and we had them racing on this maze that they made throughout the entire school. Again, thanks, Michelle. And that engaged so many students in all areas of STEAM. This was actually at Christmas time. Call us crazy.
A robot Christmas parade.
Yeah, it was a robot Christmas parade. They had to make these maps, and it's not easy. I had 5-6 students crying with stress because you had to code it with particular colors. Like, it's not like draw a line and it works. If you use different colors, it'll make it do fun things. So on the left, you also see Stephanie Ballo, Jody O'Reilly, Karen were with us in February. My class in the Essential Skills class, we did Heart Tank, like Shark Tank, to create a product for students at the Ronald McDonald House. And we also had a representative from Ronald McDonald to come in to judge their projects. So just some examples of what STEAM can look like in a school.
So to sort of draw a thread through what Victoria and Natasha have said, STEAM has provided amazing opportunities for equity and inclusion at Our Lady of Victory. We are a unique school with 2 gifted classrooms and 1 essential skills classroom. And we have been able to use passion projects, inquiry-based and project-based learning to bring those classes together, to integrate them into the makerspace. Where the technology provides, or I should say the technology removes barriers to learning. Our gifted classes are given laptops as part of their programming, and our mainstream classes are not. So being in a space where there is accessible technology for all students has given everyone that opportunity to learn and to achieve in an equitable fashion. We are also, of course, always paying attention to Indigenous ways of knowing, of learning, of being. And so part of our STEAM funding has gone to bringing students to Country Heritage Park to learn about traditional medicines. Last year, our grade 8 class put in a pollinator garden, and this year, our grade 8, my grade 8s and one of our grade 2 classes are collaborating on putting in a vegetable and fruit garden. So there are a lot of cross-curricular opportunities. There are a lot of opportunities for collaboration between staff and between students. And we see friendships being formed that might not have otherwise come to life within the STEAM programming. Just by allowing students to pursue their learning, they find, and to pursue their passions, they find that they have more in common than they think they do.
Okay, so how did we do this? So we had 3 different threads of funding, let's call it. So we sought out external funding. So at the beginning of the school year, we wrote some applications. We received $2,000 from BASEF, the Bay Area Science and Engineering. And we also received $5,000 for our collaborative inquiry through the support of Matt and his team. Like mentioned, we have a small population at our school with a low socioeconomic status in terms of students. So we had parent council approve $1,500 of school generated funds to be used with tech. That's not a lot, but it was great. And of course, that board support again from Kathy, our STEAM itinerant in the STEAM department, to support us in doing this. So that we're really grateful for.
So to wrap it all up, I think we'll just end with our recipe for success, because we have had great success, great student engagement, enthusiasm. It's honestly just spectacular to see what the students have done. We had a huge showcase where all of our classes, K to 8, were involved for Catholic Education Week. Each class put together a project, and it was absolutely stellar. The energy was unmatched. And I think we've come to the conclusion that every elementary school should have a STEAM program. But how do we do that? So what has been really important for our successes, which translate into student success, is that funding that we've received from STEAM, as well as that external funding that we applied for. Release time was extremely helpful in creating documents to help staff access STEAM based on their own capacity and to also help us build their capacity. Having itinerant and IT support to host the different events. So we had our own in-school Minecraft tournament with 73 students out of 279 students. It was only open for grades 5 to 8. So just to give you an idea of the take up here. But it would not have been possible without having partnerships with our itinerants and our IT people at the board. And then also cross-panel collaboration has been huge for us. We've partnered with Bishop Redding to do communications and media technology in our classrooms with our green screen in our AV lab. And we are looking to continue that partnership as well as build other ones. So all of these things have really helped us. And I think that that's where we are ending. So thank you so much. Ooh. It's me, it's still me. All right. I've said all of this. So increased student engagement, STEAM provides options for culturally relevant and responsive practices. It meets our Catholic graduate expectations, and it allows students to pursue real world problems that they see, that they come to class knowing about, and it helps them create and innovate and feel as though they can make a difference. And that is really key for us. So thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's so much of enthusiasm there. Really appreciate it. Some of my colleagues, trustees have attended various team events in schools, and we really appreciate it. At this point in time, I shall open up the floor to trustees for questions. Trustees, do we have any questions? I see Trustee O'Hearn, Janada, you have your hand up. You have the floor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and to everyone that presented. I don't know if you know the movie Benjamin Buttons. I want to go back to school again. I want to do that. I want to do that all over again, because the way you're reporting the students being engaged, right, that's a win, right? That's what we're all here to try to do. So well done. And I think it's just going to continue to grow, and I'm so proud of you all. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Up next is Trustee Kuzma. You have the floor.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to Matt Kovacs and the STEAM team for all that you guys do. It's amazing to see programs like these in our schools. I wish them had them when I was in school, so if we can get that at St. Anne, that'd be good. But it's so awesome to see. I've been following along on your guys' Twitter. I'm half of those impressions, but I've seen all the stuff that you guys do. I love the esports tournaments, the Minecraft, playing Rocket League and Minecraft. I do that all the time. So I love seeing all the stuff that you're doing in the schools. I didn't know a lot of that stuff. So it's just super interesting to see how deep the STEAM program goes and how it really does make a difference to all of the students, because doing smaller stuff like that, we opened a makerspace at my school when I was in grade 8, and seeing the students enjoy just that, the intro to STEAM was just amazing. So I'm really happy to see that we're going all out in STEAM in some schools. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Kuzma. I see no other hands up. So once again, thank you, Principal Morrissey, Principal Josie, Superintendent Kroll, and all the teachers here. Thank you so much for the wonderful work you do. And we hope to see it grow, see STEAM grow. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for coming. With that, we shall move on to our next order of business, which is delegations. We do not have any delegations tonight. Our next order of business is consent agenda items. The following items have been agreed upon at the agenda approval to stay on the consent agenda. Item 6.1 less 6.1.1. 6.2 less 6.2.7. The consent agenda has been broken down into 2 sections, action items and noted items. There'll be a single motion to approve the action items, and there will be no discussion. Similar, there won't be any discussion for the noted items.
Point of privilege, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Could we just get the agenda on the screen, please?
Okay. We'll pause for a minute. Okay, so as I stated, we will vote on action items 6.1 less 6.1.1. So the first item you see on the screen on top, that is removed. And the noted items, we shall pull out item 6.2.7. I will read the motion. Resolved that the Halton Catholic District School Board approve consent agenda items 6.1.2, 6.1.3. On 6 June 2023 as submitted. May I have a mover?
I'll move it.
Trustee Murphy moves. Looking for a seconder.
I'll second.
Trustee Ohan Janada. There won't be a discussion. I shall call the vote on item 6. Sorry. On item 6. Trustee Murphy.
In favor.
Trustee Saunders. In favor. Trustee Kelly.
In favor.
Trustee Kuzma.
In favor.
Trustee Carabella.
In favor.
Trustee Powell. Trustee Powell. Trustee Powell. Trustee Kennedy.
In favor.
Trustee Ohan Janada.
Favor.
Trustee Agnew.
In favor.
Trustee Powell there.
I'm here, but Elizabeth has to unmute me.
Okay.
I'm in favor.
Favor, okay. So we have 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstention. Motion carries. Consent agenda is approved. We shall move on to the next order of business, which is approval of the minutes. We have item 7.3. Can we pull up item 7.3 on screen? Minutes of the May 29th, 2023 special board meetings is in your package. Are there any errors, additions, or deletions to the minutes?
Mr. Chair, are you referring to the one I took out of the consent agenda? I took out a different one. I took out the May 16th, 6.1.1.
Let me check what we recorded. 6.1.1. Oh, sorry. Oh, my mistake. So we are at 6.1.1 minutes of the May 16th, 2023 regular board meeting. Are there any errors, deletions, or additions to the minutes? Trustee Carabella?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I brought this out of the consent agenda just for clarification on the open question period, because that's an important aspect of our board meeting where we engage with the public and parents send in their questions. So I was curious why this, and usually they've been always written out with the answer. And I was surprised to see that it wasn't, the question's not there and nor the answer. So I was wondering what happened. And has perhaps between now that it has been submitted to has the question been provided to the submitter yet?
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. I think I can answer that. Director Klein is not here. So the open question period, the response time, copies of any written response to a question will be provided to trustees and added to the minutes of a subsequent meeting. So I did follow up on this item. It's still being worked on, and it shall be added to a subsequent meeting, probably next meeting. It's a lengthy response, which and some information is being looked for. So it will be added on to a subsequent meeting, which is probably the next meeting.
Next meeting, thank you.
Yeah. Probably, let me be clear about it. We're trying our best to get the information. So since this item is pulled out of the consent agenda, if we have no other questions, Trustee Carabella, we shall take it to a vote. So may I have a mover for this item? Trustee Carabella moves. Sure. Looking for a seconder, please.
I'll second it.
Trustee Murphy. I'll call the vote, take a recorded vote. Trustee Murphy.
In favor.
Trustee Saunders.
In favor.
Trustee Kelly.
In favor.
Trustee Kuzma.
In favor.
Trustee Carabella.
In favor.
Trustee Powell. Trustee Powell.
In favor.
Trustee Kennedy. Yes, Trustee Kennedy.
Also correct. In favor.
Trustee O'Hurchinada. Trustee Agnew.
Favor.
So we have 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstention. Motion carries. The minutes of the May 16th regular board meeting have been approved. We now move on to action items. So next order of business, item number 9. We have a couple of action items tonight, but before we dive into that, I just want to once again quickly review the rules. So each opening, the trustee who opens up discussion presents the motion gets 5 minutes. There'll be 3 minutes for discussion for question period, and then 3 minutes for debate. Okay. During this question period, there will be no amendments taken. So with that, we shall go to item 9.1. International Albinism Awareness. This was a notice of motion at the May 16, 2023 board meeting. Trustee Kelly, please read the motion.
Whereas International Albinism Awareness Day takes place June 13th each year. Whereas the United Nations established a theme of this day to celebrate how groups of persons with albinism and individuals increase the visibility of persons with albinisms in all domains of life and to ensure equality. Whereas the Halton Catholic District School Board is committed to celebrating and welcoming students of many abilities in our education system. Whereas inclusivity promotes accessibility needs in our community among staff and students. Be it resolved that the Halton Catholic District School Board recognize International Awareness Day or Albinism Awareness Day annually.
Thank you, Trustee Kelly. You have moved the item. Looking for a seconder, please.
I can second.
Seconded by Trustee Agnew. The motion is in order, and I will place it on the table. Trustee Kelly, you have 5 minutes to open discussion, but hold on. Okay, your time starts now.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone. This should not be too long. I just want to mention that throughout the world, people with albinism experience a variety of forms of discrimination. Albinism continues to be gravely misunderstood on a social and medical level, and they frequently become targets of false beliefs and myths influenced by superstition because of their physical appearance, which encourages marginalization and social isolation. This results in stigma and prejudice in many forms. As a Catholic system, Jesus taught us to love, accept, and care for one another, and I bring this motion here to the table to celebrate and uplift our diverse community. As a Catholic institution, we should be inclusive of everyone, different abilities, and as a school board, we should educate the public and have, make sure that our students have the knowledge and understanding of albinism in order to make sure that they're welcoming everyone with many different abilities. International Albinism Awareness Day provides an opportunity to educate the public about the condition And albinism, as I mentioned, is still profoundly misunderstood. So every student, staff member, and stakeholder in our community should always feel included. So I hope we can all move forward with this motion to help educate and inform, as well as work towards a more accessible and inclusive environment. Yeah, pretty short.
Thank you, Trustee Kelly. I shall now open up the floor to trustees for questions only. Trustees, you will have 3 minutes for your questions. So trustees, have your hand up. Hold on. Okay. On the speakers list, we have Trustee Ohan Chanada, Trustee Kuzma, and Trustee Karabala. Trustee Ohan Chanada, you have the floor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Trustee Kelly, for bringing this forward. I just have a question. It would be operational, but in your mind bringing it forward, how would you think this would be recognized? What do you think a good way to recognize that would be? And then so the director can hear as it would be operational.
For sure, yeah, as you mentioned, it would, sorry, through you,
Kelly.
Mr. Chair, sorry, jumped the board there. So in my opinion, obviously I don't have the specific expertise to say so, but just similar to Red Shirt Day of Action for Accessibility and Inclusion, which was brought over a couple months ago, I do know that the Global Albinism Awareness Alliance is represented by the colors blue and white, as well as the designated logo for the International Albinism Awareness Day from the United Nations. So just throwing out some ideas, students could show their visible support by wearing blue shirts or ribbons, possibly. Yeah, just an idea.
Trustee Ohan Chanada.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I'll totally support it, and this motion had me at hello. So thank you.
Up next is Trustee Kuzma. You have the floor.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I love this motion. I think it's amazing. I just have similar question to Trustee Chernoda, because I know there are a lot of days in a school year where there are like different colored shirt days and etc. And I know some administration, they have issues with having so many shirt days because it can create problems for the students in focusing and etc. How would we plan around that? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kuzma.
Through you, Mr.
Trustee Kelly.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So as I mentioned, that's why I didn't specifically put down a specific shirt to wear, just because I know I've heard that from students and as a concern. That's why I also mentioned like a ribbon, possibly, you know, just like a pin to put on the shirt. But I do think that like visible support is important, and also to make sure it's not fully performative. We want to make sure that students are also aware what it represents, right? Not just they wear blue because they get to wear blue, or it's a civvies. So any expertise that will be done operationally, it's
Trustee Kuzma, next question. Okay. Up next, we have Trustee Karabala. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your motion. I just, of course, it's very worthwhile. I'm wondering, just in general, our board, we have days and we celebrate months without having motions. And I was just wondering what kind of criteria we use at our board. If you didn't bring forward this motion, perhaps we wouldn't be celebrating it. And then there's other things that aren't motions that we are celebrating. Worthwhile, everything is worthwhile. So I'm just wondering, like, where, you know, where there's a balance of, and who decides, or how we decide what we're going to focus on and bring awareness to. Thank you.
I'll pass this to Director Client, Trustee Karabala.
Thank you, Chair. It's a good question, and it really is. There's no hard and fast rule for it. A lot of it is custom. So I know that just the other day we were looking at sort of beginning to look at next year, which is kind of nice this time of year, and looking at all those. And you're right, the days are replete throughout the year, and they often, Autism Day, we have the days as well. So often they're ones that are just have been customary. Sometimes they're ones that reflect the community itself. Northern communities might focus on something a little different than here, and other ones as well. Sorry, I'm just. I think Sita, did you want to add to that?
Okay. Yeah, just to say that we had this discussion a little bit earlier as well. Usually when we think
Can you
about—
turn your mic on, please?
It is on.
Usually when we think about what days to celebrate, the consideration is really, what are those equity deserving groups that are perhaps not highlighted on a regular basis as part of our mainstream, celebrations, or whose voices are not heard. And so we usually make sort of an intentional effort to focus on those voices that are not always talked about on a regular basis or not centered. And those are the ones that we highlight. So that's one of the considerations when we think about there's a number of different days, and we could really be recognizing all of them. But where do we focus our attention? So that's been our consideration around that lens of equitable representation.
Trustee Carabella?
Point of privilege. I just wanted to jump in and mention my own why I brought this to the table as well. Like it's actually.
You want to have a comment? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, through you, Mr. Chair. So I did want to mention as well that a student actually brought it up to me just because they don't see themselves represented very often. It is a condition that is very rare, and they see many different celebrations from the board, and they were curious as to why this wasn't a specific thing that was celebrated as the board, seeing as there are many different abilities, and our community is very diverse. So they did bring it up to me, and of course I never saw it as an issue, so this is why I brought it up here as well.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella?
That's interesting because that was going to be my follow-up question. So you answered it. So you brought up too that it's a rare disease. There are many rare diseases, and there's also a rare.
Sorry, just want to jump in. It's not considered a disease.
Trustee Kelly, you
condition.
don't have a flow. You don't have the flow, Trustee Kelly. Trustee Carabella has the flow.
Okay, I'll stand to be corrected. There is also like a rare disease day that I just thought I'd mention, but you're going to clarify that for me, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. Trustee Kelly, you want to respond to that?
Sure. Sorry to jump the gun there. Yes, it is actually considered a condition. Just another thing about the awareness principle, right? So it's just making sure that people are staying aware, just because it's not something that affects the body in a very negative way. So it's a condition, not a disease. But thank you so much for bringing that up.
Trustee Carabella, you still have 1 minute. Okay. Thank you. Up next, we have Trustee Murphy. Trustee Murphy, you have the floor.
I lowered my hand, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, trustees. Trustee Kennedy, you have the floor.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Just wondering, so we don't have a lot of information yet, but thank you for your motion. Do we have any idea of what, could we get a report, or what the intent would be procedurally? Like we just had, was it Red Shirt Day? Does anybody know if there was a cost for that? Is it, like, do we have any idea of maybe what, would the school be providing material? Would the parents, I guess parents on Red Shirt Day, they dress their children in red shirts. It's pretty much provided by the parents. But for what you're thinking, do you think it would be the school really contributing resources, and any idea of what that might cost or entail?
Trustee Kelly, do you want to respond to that?
Sure, I can mention that.
If you can, if you want to, otherwise you'll answer.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. I did mention that I would leave it up to senior staff to decide as it is operational. Similar to like other city stays, I think it would be up to the parents. I didn't think there would be any personal or specific budgetary costs from the board, but I'll leave it up to.
I'll pass this to Director Klein. Director Klein, do you think there's going to be any cost associated with this?
Thank you, Chair. Not necessarily, no. I think if it was a day dedicated to, let's say, albinism, then there'd be some website and resources online that schools who want to mark that and note that would be able to avail themselves of, and that could be something, often it's something educational, and there could be something there, I would suppose, that might be monetary, and that would be something that they could use. Again, the range of those could be limitless, but it could be something that a school would decide that works out well for them.
Trustee Kennedy, do you have?
It sounds like it's something we can handle in-house with our current resources, social media announcements, and the more media discussion in the classroom. Is that kind of what I'm? Yeah.
Trustee Kelly, is that what your vision?
Yes, I would say so.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Kennedy, you still have time. Okay. Thank you. Up next, Trustee Kuzma. You had an opportunity to speak.
Yes.
On this item.
Yes.
So
can I talk about what Trustee Kennedy, you said to give kind
No.
of student, okay.
I shall now move on to debate, and they'll have an opportunity again to talk about it. So trustees, I shall now open up the floor for debate. Again, we have 3 minutes. I see Trustee Kuzma, you would like to talk. We're debating now, okay?
Yep.
So start. You have the floor.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say, kind of from the student perspective of having these spirit days, these civies days, however we want to term them, it's never really a cost for the schools unless they are providing things to the students, which again, operational we can decide. But I think that the mass majority of events, for example, Red Shirt Day, students are, it's advertised by the student council or whatever the school uses. It is presented through whatever the school uses normally for media channels. And maybe we send an email out, and none of that costs anything from the board. It happens like this for every single one of these days, and it's never been an issue. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Trustee Kuzma. I do not see any other trustees' hand up. So with that, I shall call the vote on item 9.1, International Albinism Awareness, moved by Trustee Kelly, seconded by Trustee Agnew.
Sorry to intrude, Mr. Chair. Point of
Oh,
order.
sorry, you get to close.
Yes.
You get to close. So you have 3 minutes to close.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So just to close very quickly, we do welcome in our board many students of diverse identities, and it's important to prepare our students to be educated, sensitive, aware, and celebrating all folks. Through this day, it shines a light on albinism and gives our students the awareness and knowledge to appreciate all of their needs. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Kelly. And with that, I shall call the vote on item 9.1. Trustee Saunders, how do you vote? Favor. Trustee Kelly?
In favor.
Trustee Kuzma?
In favor.
Trustee Carabella?
In favor.
Trustee Powell? Trustee Powell?
Oh, won't work. In favor.
Trustee Kennedy?
In favor.
Trustee Ohonchanada?
In favor?
Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Trustee Murphy?
In favor.
So we have 8 in favor, none opposed, no abstention, motion carries. We shall now move on to our next action item, 9.2, 2022-23 year-end audit report from the external auditors. I will call upon Superintendent Loft to present this item. Superintendent Loft, you have the floor.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. Please find attached, everyone, a Deloitte's year-end audit plan for 22-23. Lillian Chong, our audit partner from Deloitte, presented this to our audit committee at the May 25th meeting where it was unanimously approved. Mr. Chair, are you going to read the motion then?
Yes, thank you, Superintendent Loft. So I will read the motion. Be it resolved that the Halton Catholic District School Board approve the external auditors 2022-23 year-end audit planning report. May I have a mover?
I'll move it.
Moved by Trustee Ohonchanada. Looking for a seconder, please.
I can move it.
Second by Trustee Agnew. I shall now open up the floor to trustees for questions. Trustee Murphy, you have the floor. Your hand is okay. Thank you. Last call, trustees. Questions? Seeing none, I shall call the vote on item 9.2, which is 2022-23 year-end audit report from the external auditors. Trustee Kelly?
Favor.
Trustee Kuzma?
In favor.
Trustee Carabella?
In favor.
Trustee Powell?
In favor.
Trustee Kennedy? Trustee Ohonchanada?
In favor?
Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Trustee Murphy?
In favor.
Trustee Saunders? We have 6 in favor, none opposed, no abstention, motion carries. We shall now move on to our next order of business, which is staff reports. Item 10.1, 2022-23-24, budget estimates draft. Superintendent Lofts, please present the draft budget estimates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. And good evening again, everyone. Adam Cross, our Senior Manager of Financial Services, is setting up the presentation for us for tonight. to kind of go through and walk us through the budget estimates. Just to a point of, I guess, gratitude to our team in general to put this together. There is a tremendous amount of work that goes into putting this together. It's not just Adam and I that are doing it. There's we have 3 people that have really helped out with this a lot. Cheryl Dalrymple, Rebecca Albers, and Karen Rodman has really assisted in getting this to this point that we can present to you the budget for the upcoming year. So I'm going to kind of start a bit, and then Adam's going to jump in, and then we'll kind of go back and forth and go from there. So with our first slide for tonight, we actually have the budget challenges. We're going to speak to the budget challenges, speak to enrollment, speak to the estimated revenue and expenses, as well as an update on the board financial position. So budget challenges, everyone. So it's a challenging time. It's a challenging time in private sector, challenging time in the public sector. We've been receiving, and as we all know, we've been experiencing, I should say, declining enrollment since really the start of COVID. It's really had an impact on our board's finances. It's had an impact on our ability to service our community. It's something that really, from our board's perspective anyway, it's a complete change in our paradigm and a way of thinking, the way that we manage things. So it's a situation where we've been in an a continued upward slope with respect to enrollment, and now that's kind of inverted to a degree. With this comes difficulty in projecting enrollment, and with that comes staffing concerns, staffing pressures. We also have inflationary pressures. As we know, inflation is still high. It was 4.3, and I think in April it was 4.4%. Really, we're not funded at that. We receive about 2% or so for utilities, facility type operational expenditures. But as we know, expenses are coming in around the 4.5 to 4.4%. We have pressures with employee absenteeism. We have rising costs without corresponding revenue sources for things like CPP and EI, which are going up, but our funding model hasn't. Infrastructure pressures. We're fortunate that in our community, our schools are in tip-top shape, but we also have to keep up with the maintenance to keep them at that level. Safeguarding data and technology. So I know I mentioned before, you go back 7-8 years ago, this wasn't, I shouldn't say it wasn't a concern, it always is a concern, but it's really ramped up now. So that is something as well that really didn't exist in the way it does today. That's something we have to account for. And then finally, the last item we just have up there is this increase in technology costs in general. So on the pupil foundation line, we really haven't seen much of an increase in computers, classroom supplies and such over the last number of years, but inflation really has gone up tremendously. I think it's around, since we're monitoring it, it's about 24% or so in inflation, and those item lines about 2.3%. So obviously it creates a little bit of pressure on our budget. So our enrollments. So really what I want to get through to everyone, or at least try to present to everyone, is the items that are kind of in blue there. You have a light blue and a dark blue. And what do those represent? Well, those represent the pre-COVID numbers and where we're at today. So our change from 22-23, so to last year, is we're down another 383 students in elementary. We're up slightly in secondary, about 78 or so students. But if you compare us back to 1920, we're actually down about almost between 1,500 and 1,600 elementary students. And we're up in secondary about 400 or so students. So our net change from basically COVID to now is we're down about 1,100 or so students. And that represents about $12 to $13 million in funding that we have to adjust for and account for. This next chart kind of just shows in graphical form the change in enrollment from last year to this year. So we've kind of already talked about it in a chart form, but this is kind of in graphical form. And you can see that the elementary panel has been decreasing. This next one, operating grants per pupil. So this we are still the lowest funded board in the province. You might hear our friends down the road at our coterminous board, you might hear them say that they're the lowest funded. Well, they're the lowest funded public board, but we're the lowest funded board overall in the province. And even just looking at it just for simplicity, what this chart does here is it tries to remove anything that's based on a one-off kind of grant. So for example, debt, each board would have a different debt grant they receive. So what we try to do is we try to just focus on things that are common across all boards. So People Foundation, School Foundation, all those grants that every board will have, at least in our immediate area in the GTA area. So like I mentioned before, we're obviously the lowest funded. Compared to the board down the road, we're about $180 per ADE, per average daily enrollment, lower than the public board. What does that equate to? Well, it's about $6.4 million. So it's a significant amount of money. But if you compare us to the province's average, it's about 1,300 or so students, or about $46 million. So it's significant, and it's a challenge. So I'm actually going to hand it over right now to Adam, and Adam's going to go through at least some of the revenues, expected revenues for the upcoming year.
So thanks, Aaron, and good evening, Board of Trustees. Thanks for allowing me to present to you tonight. So as Aaron kind of alluded to, I'll go over the estimated revenue for 23-24, as well as the estimated expenses. So looking at our estimated revenue for 23-24, our total projected revenue is $478 million, broken up into the various kind of revenue streams outlined on the slide. Just looking at some of the changes that are highlighted there between what we projected at revised estimates for 22-23 and what we're projecting for 23-24. GSN allocation, so there's a significant increase that you're seeing in that revenue line item of 5.4 million, and that's due to increased funding benchmarks, as well as moving some former PPFs into the GSN, and those include SHISM, early math and interventions, and demographic gathering. Looking further into sort of what increases are we seeing in the GSN for 23-24. So we're seeing a $1.2 million increase in People Foundation due to the increased benchmarks, 6.4 million in teacher qualification and experience increase in funding, 1.3 million in Indigenous education funding. This is new funding for this year that we don't have the details for yet. So we put it in as a placeholder, but we're still kind of waiting on what that represents. $1 million increase in school operations and a $900,000 increase in transportation, which is largely just driven by the fuel escalator costs. Typically, that doesn't show up as revenue for the budget, but the ministry has put that in for this year. It was something that we picked up at the end of the year. But now they've included it in the revenue. What's offsetting those increases in revenue for 23-24 is a decrease in COVID funding. So in 22-23, we received 5.4 million in additional COVID funding as part of the GSN. The province has removed that for 23-24, and then that gets us to our $5.4 million increase from the current year. Looking at those priorities and partnership funds, so those PPFs, we have a slight increase there of 176,000. The primary focus from the ministry for 23-24 is math recovery and reading intervention, as well as the de-streaming of grade 9. So the math recovery and the reading intervention are kind of the next stage of the tutoring funding that we received in 22-23. That tutoring funding is not continuing into 23-24, and now we're receiving this math recovery and reading intervention funding instead. You'll see a decrease in ESL funding for 23-24. This is slightly due to sort of a changing in strategy at the province when it comes to ESL. It's also a bit trickier when we're budgeting for this as they've changed the year end. So now the funding year end for ESL corresponds to the province's year end, which is March 31st, as opposed to the school board's year end of August 31st. But there's a drop there of 240,000 for 23-24, and you'll see on the expenses we've dropped our service level to correspond with that decrease. There's a slight decrease in federal grants due to the ending of a ventilation funding program in 22-23 related to HEPA filters and school ventilation. We are projecting an increase in interest revenue of 450,000 due to the rising interest rates. This is kind of in spite of the provincial cash management strategy, so we're still able to earn some interest, not as much as we had before the province implemented the cash management strategy, but still with interest rates rising a significant amount that we then can utilize as we see fit from an expense perspective.
Jump in there a little bit, Adam. Just to remind trustees that that's a large impact that we have on our budget. When they change the strategy to the deferred grant payment, it's having about right now with interest rates being as high as they are, it's about a $1.5 million impact that it has to our board by not having that money in our bank versus having it at the province's their bank account.
So looking at our rental revenue, we're projecting a decrease in rental revenue for our school facility rentals. And this is largely to be more in line with the recent rental demand. So we were, I would say, optimistic in 22-23 that we'd see sort of a normalization or moving back to normal pre-COVID in terms of the rental of our facilities. We still haven't seen that quite come back fully. So we've modified our revenue projections for 23-24 based on that. You can see a large increase in international student revenue of 1.8 million, and this is largely due to an increase in projected international students for 23-24. So we're looking at about 269 ADE for international students in 23-24 compared to 136 in 22-23. When it comes to school generated funds, so there's a significant increase there of 3.7 million. And this is again is projecting more normalized school generated funds for 23-24. So kind of pre-COVID, we're moving our projections for school generated funds back to those levels.
Adam, I might just, if I could jump in on SGF for a sec, just to remind trustees that that increase in school generated funds does not impact our operational budget. It's not money coming to the board. It's really money staying at the school level. So just to clarify that.
Yeah, and you'll see on the expense side, we budget school generated funds to be surplus deficit neutral. So we have an equal and offsetting expense. So the expectation is that money's raised is spent in the same school year. So there is a zero impact to the bottom line when it comes to our school generated fund budgeting every year. And then the last one's kind of interesting. So deferred capital contributions, again, this is unique to school boards in that when the government funds us for capital projects, we recognize the revenue that we receive from them, not when we receive it, but over the life of the asset to kind of mirror the amortization on the asset. Typically, we've seen this increase because we continue to add capital assets to our books and to our operations. But for 23-24, due to the timing of some assets becoming fully amortized, we actually are seeing kind of a decrease. So we fully recognize the revenue related to those assets, And as a result, our deferred capital contributions have decreased compared to the previous year.
And just add, that's primarily based on the technology, some of the technology we've purchased the last few years.
So looking at expenses, we worked quite heavily with all the departments to develop their budgets for 23-24, factoring in kind of those challenges that Aaron spoke to earlier, as well as looking for any efficiencies and ability to streamline costs or better manage the costs to reflect what departments are actually planning to use for the upcoming year. And this is sort of the results of that hard work by the departments. So looking at our expenses, again, the total expenses that we're projecting for 23-24 is 468.9 million. Again, kind of looking at our comparison from 2022-23 revised estimates to our 23-24 projected expenses. So looking at classroom teachers, there's a significant decrease there of $5.7 million. And that's due to reduction in the number of FTE due to our lower enrollment projections, as well as the reduced COVID funding. So just to remind everybody, in 2022-23, we are projecting a deficit due to maintaining lower class sizes as a result of the continued pandemic of about 3.9 million. And again, that's because we kept additional teachers to keep our class sizes low as we move back to kind of a more normal classroom environment. Looking at the increase in educational assistance of 565,000, this increase is largely due to an increase in the hourly wages as negotiated in the collective agreements between the province and QP. In terms of our ECE increase of 431,000, it's very similar to the EAs, and in that that increase is due to an increase in hourly wages as per negotiated collective agreements. Looking at textbooks and classroom supplies, so there is a decrease to this in 2023-24 of 416,000. The decrease is largely due to a reduction in kind of textbooks and instructional supplies, some of which related to tutoring supports. And given that we are not receiving additional tutoring support grant funding in 23-24, we've eliminated those costs from the budget, as well as what's driving this decrease, which is kind of a bit of a nuanced thing, is an increase in F&E, sort of small tangible capital asset costs. So as part of our funding for operating, the government allows us to budget for some of these minor tangible capital assets using operating expenses, but we still have to capitalize them. So basically, anytime we're projecting to use those operating expenses for capital purposes, we're moving it from operating to capital, which when you do that, decreases your operating expenses. So that's part of the driver of that decrease as well, because we're increasing some minor tangible capital asset costs. When we look at our computers line, so there's a slight increase of 123,000 for computers, and this is largely driven by software increases related to the early reading intervention funding that I mentioned previously as being a new PPF for 23-24. When we look at professional and paraprofessional costs, there's an increase of 132,000. The main drivers of this are, again, negotiated increase in hourly wages for negotiated collective agreements for some of our computer techs in schools, as well as due to the deficit that we were projecting for 22-23, we paused or deferred some of the increased like staffing complement that was approved as part of the 22-23 original estimates back last June. So while they were approved by the board, we didn't hire the positions in 22-23. And when we came to revised estimates in 22-23, we took that cost out. Now we're adding it back into the 23-24 budget to reflect those previously approved positions by the previous board. In terms of library and guidance, so there's a slight decrease here of $345,000. This is just a reallocation variance. So we are moving some guidance staff, some staff that were previously recorded in guidance staff back to the classroom teachers line. That's what's driving that difference. In terms of staff development, so there is an increase in staff development of 173,000. This is largely due to us moving some specialized special ed equipment training into revenue from deferred revenue, and then matching that revenue with expenses. So when we look at our GSN and the funding that I mentioned previously, there's two components. So when we get GSN funding, some of the funding we recognize immediately as revenue. Other funding that we receive is enveloped. You might be familiar with that or heard us mention the enveloping again. And what this means is that you can only spend those funds for the specified purpose that the government has outlined. If you don't spend those funds on the specified purpose, you have to defer that revenue until the point in which you do spend it on the purposes outlined by the government. To help our departments sort of see the funding that they have access to in their departments, we typically roll over all our deferred revenue from the previous year into revenue so that the department can see how much revenue they actually have access to. And then typically with the deferred revenue, we just equally offset them. So there's a net neutral impact to the bottom line. Realistically, the departments typically don't spend all that money. If they haven't spent the money, been able to utilize the money in the previous year, usually they won't be able to utilize the full amount plus that additional money in the future year. But it's just a kind of nuance as to how we allow the departments to see it rather than how it's truly accounted for. And then in terms of our department heads, so there's an increase of 580,000 related to department heads. You would have recalled from when we were presenting the Q2 budget to actual that our actual costs for department heads were much larger or significantly higher, almost fully utilized our budget as of 50% of the way through the year because previously we hadn't separated the department head allowance from the general salary of the teacher. This year, to better align with how we track the costs in reality, we've moved that allowance to the department heads line from classroom teachers. So that's what that increase is. It's just a reallocation from one classification to another. In terms of school administration costs, so there's an increase of 732,000. Again, the main driver for this is that hourly wage increase as per the negotiated collective agreements for all our school administrative staff that are unionized. In terms of our continuing education, there's a slight decrease of 200,000, and that goes back to the reduced ESL funding that I mentioned to you when we were speaking about revenue. So we've had to reduce our service level, which means less instructional hours and less weeks that we're offering ESL for 23, 24 to stay within our funding that we're to receive for the ESL program. Looking at our other expenses for 23, 24, so board admin expenses have increased 1.5 million. So there's a couple of drivers to this. The first is an increase due to grid movement and the filling of vacant positions. So again, because we were in that deficit position for 23, 24, if we had a vacancy that we weren't planning on filling in 22, 23, or we had elected to defer filling that position until 23, 24, we've added those positions back to the budget, which equated to about 4 positions when it comes to this. There's also an increase in legal fees and insurance costs included in board admin, as well as a labor provision in board admin. In terms of transportation, so there's a slight increase in transportation costs of 572,000. This is due to the increased operating costs of HSTS. It's important to note from a transportation funding perspective that we're projecting to have costs exceeding the funding that we're receiving of about 950,000 for this year. So transportation will continue to be a pressure point for the board when it comes to being able to provide the transportation needed to our students. From a school operations perspective, so we have a $3.6 million increase in school operation costs. Again, this is largely due to an increase in hourly wages as per negotiated collective agreements for custodial staff, as well as grid movement of our other staff. We also are seeing an increase in general repair costs, electrical costs, and heating and cooling costs, as well as some contractual custodial costs and increasing custodial supply costs, as well as an increase in insurance costs for our facilities and an increase in snow removal costs based on last year's snow removal costs. School operations is an area that we significantly see an impact of inflation, and that's kind of reflected in the increase in costs that you're seeing in that line item. In terms of the other people accommodation costs, so this is primarily driven by our debt interest costs, and we're seeing a decrease in debt interest cost due to a lower principal balance outstanding for 23-24. In our provision for contingencies, so as directed by the ministry, we were to record the impact of the 1.25% collective agreement benchmark for union groups that have not settled their negotiations under this provision for contingency. So that 5.6 million represents that 1.25% benchmark provided by the province. In terms of school generated funds, so again, you'll see that 3.75 million increase, which matches the revenue projection for school generated funds. And then similar to the deferred capital contributions, our amortization has decreased by 800,000 due to more tangible capital assets becoming fully amortized at the end of 22-23. So that's it for revenue and expenses, and then I'll pass it back to Aaron to go over our board financial position.
Thank you, Adam. So the good news after all that discussion, after all those challenges we've had this year, and there's been a lot of challenges, a lot of changing in funding, a lot of funding that isn't matching the expenses that's really outside of our control. We essentially are having a balanced budget, and I'll get into what I mean by essentially in a second, because what's pushing us into a compliant budget are things that happened years ago from capital projects that we've all agreed to around this. Our past boards have agreed to, not necessarily everyone, because obviously everyone wasn't here, but those capital projects were agreed to around this table, and we've implemented them. So if you look at the top line here, $62,000, that's essentially where we're at, revenue minus expenses in simplistic terms. So all the new revenue, or the revenue we generated this year, less the expenses, our overall operating surplus is $63,000 or so. Where it comes down to my eyes are going here, 595. roughly, is the adjustments for past projects that we did on capital. So there's another slide that I'd like to actually address that on, and it's kind of just isolating where that 594 is coming from and what I mean by past projects, not current year. Go to the next slide, Adam, please. So what this slide here is, everyone, so this is us, the amount of money that we've used in the past for projects. These were the ones that were basically prior to August 31st, 2019. And that's when the ministry changed the way we need to report on these areas. So at that time, we used $7 million or allocated or earmarked $7 million or so, 7.1 million for projects. And it was for all those projects that you see listed there. Now you can see that we're amortizing these over a number of different terms for the remaining service life of all these assets. The largest one here is 29 years still remaining on $5 million. So every single year for the next 29 years, we're going to have that deficit that's coming in that you'll see on the other side for $177,000. So the total for this year was 342 on this area. From prior to August 2019. The next page are all the new ones. So these are all projects that we as a board have had approved. We as a board have made decisions on how we're going to fund. So we all have our turf fields, for example. We receive revenue for our turf fields. We reserve that revenue and put it aside. So in the event that we need to replace our fields, we have the funds available for us to replace them. You can see here that right now that's added up to about 2.6 million or so. And you can see the remaining service life of a lot of these assets. There's 572,000 or so, plus the 427 that we allocated for current year for it. So there's about $1 million that's going to impact our deficit. You can see we've already set aside 2.5 million in past savings. We already have that there, but it's impacting us by another $1 million due to amortization of these capital expenses. So the next slide is the one that really helps, hopefully helps explain this, because it's kind of a convoluted concept. So what I've done here is I basically isolated all our other capital type, or sorry, surpluses on that very first line. So other charges to surplus. So that's everything else. There's our 62,000, everyone, that middle column, which is our in-year change. The next column down, or the next, sorry, row down, is capital projects amortization pre-August 2019. So that was the date that I was mentioning before. So we have $342,000 this year that's putting us into a deficit because of projects that we had in prior years. And we're going to have these for an average, the average remaining service life is 25 years. So we're going to have 25 years to have this on our books. The good part on those ones, everyone, is that the ministry approved those ones and they'll deduct it from our compliant budget. So they'll say, yeah, you're right. Before August 2019, those changes that we have there for 342,000 will not count against your compliance due to be a compliant budget or not. The next one down, the next row down where it says capital projects amortization post August 31st, 2019 for about $700,000 or so. Those are ones that they say the ministry has not approved, meaning that they haven't said it's okay to use it. We haven't given you our permission. We didn't need that permission prior to August of 2019. We as a board have made decisions to replace our turf fields with our capital reserve, money that we've set aside. All this money is already earmarked for us. We already have the 4.28 million sitting there in our opening balance. It's already there. It's surpluses from prior year for that specific purchase to be kind of drawn down over, in this case here, an average of 19 years. So then again, you might say, what is that again? Well, that was ALC Oakville, and the majority is artificial turfs and track replacements. So again, these are things that as a board we need to do. We're not funded for it from the ministry, so we elected to, if we have the turfs, we have turf fields at all our secondary schools, there's a cost for those turfs, and we found a way to fund it. And for lack of a better term, it's impacting us and causing us to have a compliant budget and not a balanced budget. So this isn't from current year expenses. These are expenses that have already occurred. We've already spent it. It's a paper entry. It's not money that's coming out of this money this year. We've already paid everything in those items or in those buckets, but we're still having to amortize it down over the course of the next 25 and 19 years. And you might say, well, where's the expense side? Well, the expense is actually in our budget already. So we also have the amortization expense. The offset of all those numbers are already being captured in our expenses. This is just the offsetting revenue similar to DCC. So then if you look at the total at the bottom, so really our opening is now is the $30 million, so $31 million is our surplus, just aggregate of everything. We've used about 936 this year, of which $1 million of it was related to past capital projects, leaving us with about 30 million or so left. Then you see items below, and I have, these are ministry adjustments. So remember how I mentioned before that the ministry is allowing us to at least anything pre August 2019, it's kind of being deducted and it's not counting against our compliant budget. So the main one there you can see is the capital. So there's our 342 that was all the pre-August 31st, 2019 being deducted. The other one, this is something that dates back to 2010 and 11. It's called a capital wrap-up template. You might see it as a negative. It's an in and an out. So that's why it comes up as a negative. So it's an adjustment. So bottom line, cut to the chase. When we get to the end, our compliant budget is impacted by 594,667 or 66 here. And the majority of that is coming from capital projects that have already been expensed, that have already occurred in years other than this year. So I think it's extremely important to mention that. If you want to look at our operating surplus is $63 million. That's what our surplus is for this year. These other two entries are us accounting for things that we need as a board, that we need to replace as a board, that we've made decisions on to utilize our money and to save for the future for our students. And it's to the benefit of our students that we have this. So hopefully that helps at least explain. I know for the last number of years, Trustee Carabello, remember this, we've been going over this since really this happened, and we've been talking about this, and we're trying to think of a better way to explain it. How it doesn't, it's not really the current year, it's past years. And this is at least a way we thought, just isolating it and to kind of get the numbers that tie so you can see those two amortization periods. You know what, I might ask is there questions on this, everyone, before I move on? Just, if not, I can move on, we can come back to it too. So I can just go on.
Trustees, do we have questions? I see a couple of hands up. So are we pausing the presentation?
Oh, I'm just going to, only questions on this right now, this concept here, not so much on everything.
Okay, so trustees, we have two trustees hands up. Do we have questions, Rick? Okay, let's go. What about Trustee Chanada? Trustee Robert Kennedy, I don't see your hand up there, but I see your hand up now. You have questions on this part?
Sure. Yeah. So the through you, Mr. Chair. So the deficit of 594, yes, is related to the capital budget, but that can be made up with savings in other areas, right? Or not?
So through Mr. Chair, to Trustee Kennedy, it's not a deficit though, Trustee Kennedy. It's something you can see we've already put the money aside for it. There's almost 4.3 million set aside that we've already used. We've already set $4.3 million from our savings to pay for these items. That was the plan all along. So when we had surpluses in past years, we put that money aside to pay for these items when they came due. That's all we're doing is paying for items that have already occurred, that we were setting up, that we were planning for. What's changed is some of the requirements from the ministry in August of 2019. So like we'd almost be double, if we were to get rid of that, we would have to double save on that. We'd be paying for the same item twice, essentially. That's where the problem is. The top line is our in-year. Those other two items are based on prior year expenses. We've already set money aside for. And if we were to do it again, we basically double counting that and saving twice for the same expense. We've already paid all these. We've already put the tracks in. We've already put the fields in. We've already paid for the items. Now it's the entry of funding that. And the only reason it's not done in year was when the ministry changed it more to a TCA type, a tangible capital asset type environment. Back in, I guess I'm trying to think back, 08, 09 in that period. So probably was actually 10, 11 when it was finally fully implemented. So that's what it's rated to. The old way, we just would have expensed it, we would have put the revenue in that year, and we would have been done with it. Now we have to show it and match the expense to revenue. Because our revenue is actually a surplus, it shows up in our reserves.
And lots, you can continue. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So the next one, we've seen this one before, everyone. So this is the concept of the balanced budget versus the compliant budget. So a surplus budget would essentially be anything above that top line being in the positive, right? If we had a positive dollar figure. Compliant budget is ministry allows up to a 1% to be a compliant budget. So we have right now, we're looking at operating revenues in the a little bit over 4 million or so. So that gives us about 400 million. And that gives us about 4 million or so as our buffer to be compliant. So as we know, it says 595 due to past capital projects. Non-compliant, it used to be 2%. You might remember during COVID, it was over 2%. It's gone back to 1%, which is what it's always been. Not always, but at least in the last little while, it's been 1%. So the next couple of slides, it's just, these are right from EFIS, everyone. So EFIS is our reporting mechanism that we use to report to the ministry. You might hear sometimes we do our financial statements just due to timing. We'll say that we file with EFIS, but we will refile again officially once we get our board approvals. So this is essentially, this is not essentially, this is a slide, a tab within that confirms that we are compliant in the areas that we need to be compliant in. And that's essentially what those next two slides are, just confirming for right now for our draft position. And then next steps, we'll be bringing back the budget to be approved. They'll be separated out, just like you saw in there. In the current report, it'll be separated out with staffing and then essentially non-staffing items. That was a motion that was from our previous group of trustees, and we've just kept it going forward. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes what we have to present tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent Lofts. I shall now open up the floor to trustees. Trustees, do we have questions? Trustee Saunders, you're up first.
Yeah, I just, two items caught my attention when we were looking through here. The first one is classroom teachers. We're showing a reduction of 5.766214 million. I'm just wondering how that number was arrived at, and does this represent anticipated reductions in this teacher staffing next year?
Superintendent Lofts.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I might ask for some help from my colleagues on this, Superintendent Oldman, but I'm going to start it off. Our enrollment has been down, as we know. Our staffing has been up. We had something during COVID where we had we were keeping our staffing levels at 25-1. Our growth model was, as we know, it was a pretty steep curve going up over the last 15, 20, maybe even longer years. So part of the thought was that this would continue. There was no reason to believe it wouldn't continue, and a lot of the teachers that we would have would be absorbed into the system with our growth. As we know, growth didn't continue. COVID came in, and those other charts they show we're actually down since COVID. So our last pre-COVID year, 2020, 1920, we're down that 1,100 or so students. So we had the double impact of having a cap on our size of our classrooms under the anticipation of growth, which never materialized, and then as well as having a number of staff from the prior years that were really too high to begin with as well. So it's a mathematical equation how we're funded for classroom teachers. Ministry funds us at secondary panel primarily at 23-1. It's at 30-1 for online learning. So it's a little different there. And the elementary panels are different. They have different ratios depending on the grades, right? Primary class size 20-1. The intermediate grades are 24.5. So, and that's an average too. I think I should mention. So, Superintendent Oldman, did I anything to add or?
Mr. Chair, may I?
Sure,
Through you, Chair. Yeah, so Trustee Saunders, just in the numbers that would have been preliminarily shared, at least based on when we provided early notice of projected redundancy, those are not confirmed until later this week for secondary and into next week, later into next week for elementary. So at the June 20th, I can have a firm number, the early notice numbers and the projected the projected early notice, and then the confirmed, I do anticipate still having a significant amount of redundancy. It will be less than what we have initially projected. But I do think based on our prior experience, where we did rescind or recall, we rescinded prior to September 1 and recalled after September 1 in the prior year. And that was in response to kind of a stagnation of enrollment, as well as a COVID lightening of additional funding that was kind of temporarily availed to us, as well as the 25-to-1 prior desire to keep classes kind of contained during the COVID time, and obviously for good reason and measure. But there's costs associated with that, and so we're just trying to right size the organization in compliance with the ministry funding as well as class size regulations. So as a result of that, we do anticipate confirmed redundancy, but those numbers will be firmed up either later this week for secondary and into next week for elementary.
Okay, Mr. Chair, if I could just add just one more quick point to that. One thing to remind trustees is that if enrollment does return or goes up, we have the ability to rehire staff. So that's the one thing too, that we had to pick that line in the sand. This is what we forecast enrollment to be, and if we have enrollment of this, then we need that. But if we do need more teachers, we have the ability to go out and bring more in, as we all hope.
Trustee Saunders, one follow-up question. I noticed on the details when I was looking down, there was a line item, director and supervisory officers. I noticed that when you combine the benefits has gone up 35% in our projections, $500,000. I'm just wondering if you could give me an idea how that number was arrived at and what that represents.
Superintendent Lofts.
Through you, Mr. Chair. That's a conversation I think that we need to have in a different form, to be honest. As part of it is going up as well. There's changes in CPP and EI as well. So that's part of it. In benefits alone, there's going to be a change right there. It's going to go up, but
thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Saunders. Up next is Trustee Owen Chanara.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Superintendent Loft. Just a couple of elaborations I need. So the library access guidances went down 3.61%. So I just need to understand a little better. That's all. And then the other one would be department heads. So I just need to understand that.
Sure. Through you, Mr. Chair. So for library and guidance, last year, so in our 22-23 revised estimates, we had 9 guidance teachers allocated to the elementary panel for that 7-8 grade 8, 7s and 8 funding that we receive from the province. 9 was a bit high in terms of what we were funded for versus what we had allocated to that line item. Upon further investigation with the departments, primarily student success, it was determined that 4 of those positions actually related to student success itinerants, so pathway itinerants and things of that nature. So what we did was we just reallocated those positions back to the classroom teachers line, which is where the itinerants typically get presented. So that's the guidance decrease that you saw, and then the department head increase. So as I kind of mentioned before, there are 2 kind of components to the department head costs. There's a time component. So a portion of their salary gets allocated to department head time. So the work that they're dedicated to being the department head, as well as their allowance that they receive as a department head. In 2022, 2023, we were just picking up that department head allowance as part of their regular salary in our budget. So it was again being reflected in the classroom teacher line. But when we actually physically pay the employees, we break it out to reflect that is a department head cost that they are getting paid for. And so our actual costs were showing up in department head, but the budgeted cost was showing up in classroom teachers. So to realign to where the actual costs were landing, we moved that department head allowance from their teacher budget line to the department head line to show the true cost of department heads.
Thank you, Trustee Ogunchinola.
Thank you. Just to summarize I'm saying it out loud, so I'll retain it. It's a reclass.
Yeah.
Right. So the fluctuations, positive and negative, you're reclassing where those
Yeah. So excluding any potential increases in wages for those employees, it's just moving from classroom teachers to department heads and from guidance teachers to classroom teachers for those two line items.
Thank you, Trustee Ohan Chanada. Up next is Trustee Carabella. Trustee Carabella, do your desk move or the chair move?
I moved.
I'd prefer that you go back to your spot. I'd like to keep it that way later.
Oh.
So you can ask your questions and then can go back to your spot later. So Trustee Carabella.
Okay. Through you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned on the board expenses at the that there were some positions that were added. Are you allowed to say what the positions were? There was like 4 positions added.
Added.
I'll start.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily added, Trustee Carabella. They were ones that we had approved last year. We just didn't hire in time. So when we were talking back in December, when we were dealing with the deficit, we put a freeze on any kind of hires that people that weren't hired yet. So those 4 positions, they were approved last year. We just didn't hire them last year. So they should have been in a normal year. They would have probably been already in our books, but that's the difference. So it's not new positions. That's actually a good point, though. I will remind trustees. Unlike other years, we've seen us bring forward new initiative program enhancements. This year, we're not bringing them forward until the fall, if there's the ability to have additional funds within the budget. Once we get an idea, we'll bring them through revised estimates, whereas normally in the springtime, now we bring them through now. We'll have the list of all the new initiatives, all the program enhancements. And the main reason for that is to see how our enrollment turns out in the fall, so that we're not making that commitment before we know have a better idea where our financial position is.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella.
Okay, and another question was about the school generated funds. You said usually the revenues, you expect them, like you always make them balance out. So, but is that truly what happens? I'm just wondering if that's truly what happens, and if there are leftover student generated funds that didn't get used up in the year, what happens to them?
Adam?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Carabella. Yeah, so obviously we want the schools to fully utilize the funds that they raise in the year that they raise it, so that the students that have raised those funds receive the benefit. In reality and practicality, depending on what they're raising the funds for, they might not fully spend by the end of the school year. So sometimes when a school's doing a larger sort of fundraising drive for maybe tech or kind of significant things that they want to bring to the school, it can take multiple years before they've fundraised enough to do those purchases. And in those types of situations, you'll see a carryover, where you'll also see a carryover in terms of revenue received but not spent is the secondary fees. So the activity fees, typically students pay for those in the summer. So we'll see revenue being recognized by our August 31st year end, but the costs associated with that revenue won't actually be spent until September. So there's the timing piece that we see every summer related to those student activity fees in the secondary panel.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella.
Thank you. Just a point of privilege.
Yes.
It's just easier to see the board from here, so that's why I moved up. And since the 2 trustees aren't here.
Right, I get it, but the chair needs to be informed and need to take permission from the chair before trustees move. You have allocated spot, and I'm very particular about that. But if you are requesting it now, I can consider that.
Okay, well, I'll request it now, and in the future I will ask.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Carabella. Up next, Trustee Kennedy. You're up next.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Just a question about the GSN per student. We're one of the lowest funded boards, but you also mentioned that Halton district is also the 2nd lowest funded. Why do we think that is? I mean, what I can see they have in common is they're both in Halton. So is it a position of the ministry? I know we have a notice of motion. It's the most affluent community, probably Burlington and Oakville in Ontario. And we also have parents that can raise a lot of money for school generated funds, maybe to pay for technology they want to use the GSN for. So would that be a reasonable reason as to why you think it's the lowest?
Superintendent Lofts.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Kennedy. Maybe I'll start with the answering your first part or your last part first. So it doesn't actually impact, it has no real impact on school generated funds. That doesn't factor into the equation. A lot of the differences are based on just some of the StatsCan data that we have for our area. So some of the, I'm thinking more on the specialties. So for the GSNs, so your pupil foundation, those kind of grants are pretty much the same across the province. So those are the same. Where you get into the differences in the demographics and such is more on the specialty type grants. So for example, Spec Ed. Spec Ed's one area number just based on some of the StatsCan data that you see within there, it will impact our section 2, which is our special education funding. Another one too is a learning opportunities grant. So like, for example, our EQAO scores, you might have heard us say before that we're the only, and Superintendent Kroll is here, we're the only board right now that wasn't allocated a math, not a math coach, but a math facilitator out of the whole province. And why was that? Because our scores were strong and above the minimum. Superintendent Kroll, is there anything to add to that maybe? Or
just that we're in ongoing conversations with the ministry about that, because we do feel although our schools are performing above the threshold to qualify, there's definitely still work that person could be doing. So Director Klein and I have been having ongoing conversations with the ministry about that.
Thank you. Trustee Kennedy.
Sure. So for total expenses of 469 million, operating is operating 408 expenses or 431? It's 431. Operating expenses. Expensive. Or yeah.
Operating
revenue. Yeah.
That's coming from
408.
That's like all our ministry grants. Our foundation, school foundation, learning opportunity. There's about that's coming from the how we get up to 400.
Yeah.
So our PPFs, for example, our PPFs were a big one this year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we have some of the federal grants. Our interest revenue, our
EDCs is a big one for us. So that's the development charges that we raise to be able to purchase land for future school sites.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy.
Follow. So how much?
I gave you 2 questions. You have a clarification point or question?
It's another question later.
So I'll put you back in the queue and I'll go to Trustee Carabella and come back to you. Because I gave you 2 questions already. Trustee Carabella, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just gathering my thoughts. I thought I had a bit more time. I wanted to ask. Oh my gosh.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. We'll go back to Trustee Kennedy.
So this is not a second question, it's a clarification first.
Oh, I thought you had a new question.
Right?
You had a new question, was it?
Yes, but for the new question, can I have a clarification on the previous question?
Oh, that's why I asked you. Was it a clarification
Yes,
at that point in
yes.
time?
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead. At that point in time, I would have allowed you if you said it was a clarification, but I did not hear that. So go ahead.
So of the money we can control then, we've got about 15%, like after salaries, right? And within that 15%, what else can we not control? Would that be like pupil accommodation? Are there other things, capital, like?
Capital,
right, not that.
Sorry, this from a revenue perspective or expense? Yeah, so when we're looking at our operating expenses, there are ones that we have discretion over. There are ones that we don't have discretion over. The ones we don't really have discretion over are any ones where we already have a committed contract to that spans multiple years. Utilities, we're at the mercy of what the costs are for those and how much we're utilizing them. If it's a hot summer or if it's a cold winter, obviously we'll see increases in those types of costs. in terms of the true discretionary, that comes down to kind of like supplies, materials, those types of things. We have some leeway with some of the auxiliary staff, I would say we have some leeway with, but a lot of that remaining cost when you look at it is still kind of earmarked or uncontrolled by us because of fluctuating prices in the market.
Trustee Kennedy.
So thank you. So as a follow-up to that, with some of the costs that we are, as Trustee Saunders mentioning, the decrease in classroom teachers, can we get do we have staffing charts that show the direct effect on a per school basis of the staffing effects? Was it 47 or 50, 45 to 50 teachers? Do we have that information compared to population declines in the school?
Superintendent Lofts?
Not as part of this budget, no. We don't have that here to provide right now.
But we have it.
We do with the analysis, yes. Yeah.
Could trustees get a copy of that?
It's maybe it's more of an operational type issue, and
well, it's a decrease in expense, right? So it's part of the governance of the budget.
Well, it's yes, but it's also tied to a formula-driven calculation. Maybe I'll just defer to.
I'd certainly say that's something for us to consider. So I'm kind of trying to determine what you're looking for. Is it like a
or just to get an idea of
us? Is it just
like how the allocation was allocated given the decrease in the redundancies of schools and how that breaks down? How do we get to that 5.7 is what I'm looking at. It's a big number. How do we get to that number? How does it break down?
Superintendent Lofts, do we have the answer now? Or
I can circle back to. Well, let me just finish. I think that's certainly something we can come back on in terms of the considerations and the factors that are part of that.
You're seeking additional information. Is this something that Superintendent Lofts can provide you? Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
I guess from my perspective, I'm looking at the funding side of it. How many were funded for? Is that what we're looking for then?
Well, first of all, I wasn't considering we'd have a fulsome answer now. I think there's a lot of considerations. You're asking about how. Sorry, I think we could talk about those factors. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm moving back to. I'll go to Trustee Murphy first because you're not spoken.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. There was a slide there that talked about compliance report, and if you could just briefly re-summarize that for me so I can get it straight in my head. I appreciate that.
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Murphy. So that's what I was going on about with all the capital and why we're in a compliant budget and not in a, Adam, oh, you got it up there. Thanks, Adam. So you can see here that you see that negative, and I don't know if you can see it on your screen, probably easier than up here, but you have almost $595,000, and it's saying that needs further investigation, right, due to compliance. That 595 is 100% related to past capital projects. So it's projects that we did in prior years that it's just being amortized this year. From an operating perspective, we are balanced, but from the perspective of a compliant budget, we need to explain, a couple things. We need to make sure that we have the funds to cover that, which we do. You're allowed to have up to 1% of your operating budget. As long as you're below that in your deficit, you're a compliant budget. You go forward. So you're allowed to have up to 1%. So our 1% is for roughly $4.1 million. We're at 595,000 down because of capital projects in prior years. And then the other areas are in the bag, and we're compliant in all the other areas. So that was the one where it required further clarification because we had a negative 595, but that's one I was mentioning before. Maybe if we go back to the capital one, if we could, that slide, and then you can actually see that 595 in here. There we go. So see that bottom number? There's your 594,666. So that's that exact same number that was on the other screen, right? That was putting us into that negative position. And you can see that what it's related to is the net change between the 62,902, the positive, that's our operating surplus,
and the 657,568, which relates to capital projects that we did as a board post August 31st, 2019. So after August of 2019, that's the amortization cost. There's the opening, which is our money that we set aside from past surpluses to cover that expense. That's it drawing down, and that's what we have left in that. And we have 19 more years for us to do something with that on average. So one is 19, one is 25. You might say, well, what about that 342, 262 above? So because that happened before the ministry made the change, they reduce it. See at the bottom says Ministry MOE, Ministry of Education adjustment pre-August 31st, 2021 capital. There's that 342 being added back in, and that's how we get to 594. So it's something that occurred in prior year that's of no relation to this budget at all. It's also something that we set money aside for in prior years to cover this. So we have the money there. We already have it. We've already paid for it. We've already set the money aside from our surplus to cover this. And that's what's pushing us into a compliant budget and not a balanced budget. Stuff that's really, it's us using our surplus, us using our bank account to pay for things that it's like saving for a car and paying that car and then paying for the car and being punished for the next 19 years as you pay off the car that you put money aside for in your bank to pay it. Your car payment. Probably the easiest way to present it.
Trustee Murphy, follow up?
No, that's it for now.
Thank you. We have a speakers list here. Up next, Trustee Carabella, you're ready. You're the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking at the page 121, which is the board administration and governance expenses. And I know it was mentioned about legal fees, but I don't see them on this list. Where would they be under? Are they included in this graph?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Carabella. So legal fees will be included as part of the fees and contractual services line under the board administration section. So within that 1.3 million being proposed for 22, 23, 2024, you will see legal fees in there. So it's not all legal fees that make up that 1.3 million, but a portion of that 1.3 million is related to legal fees, of which we've increased them in 23, 24. Typically, you see us increase legal fees in years when there's collective bargaining going on, because there are some things where we need legal advice related to that, as well as some other kind of costs.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella?
So a follow-up would be, and why wouldn't it be presented where it's more split up so we can see what our legal fees or what legal fees are for, than just like one line that is an umbrella for everything, but we're not understanding how the money's spent?
Superintendent Lopes?
I'll address that. Trustee Cabrera, these have been the same reports that have been brought forward to board for a number of years. So
I've always not liked that.
Yeah, if it's the will of the board, we can make a change to it. But we haven't changed anything that we've presented.
Just to add to that, so the way we present it to the board is how we report it to the ministry. So these line items that you see here, those are the line items that we have to submit our data on to the ministry in that EFIS reporting that Aaron has mentioned. So from our perspective, we found it to be transparent so that you can see the direct connection between what we've submitted to the ministry and what's being presented to the board. But obviously, if the board wants further details, that can be accommodated. But I do think it's important to keep that connection between how we're reporting to the ministry and how we're presenting it here, so that it's easier to see that and not kind of get confused and have to add multiple line items to get to those totals that are being submitted, in terms of a verification of what we presented to you is what we've submitted to the board, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. Your question?
So, well, a follow-up would be then, if I'd like that, more line items, how would we go about seeing that?
Superintendent Bluff?
Mr. Chair, on that request.
Yeah, so Trustee Carabella, would you like to see those additional items in this presentation, or would you like it to be presented to you?
Well, I think it's for everybody, but I know it can't be done right now, but
No.
perhaps in the 2 weeks.
Superintendent Lawrence?
Just for clarification purposes, we have like thousands of GL accounts. If you're looking at kind of expense types, so for example, if you're looking to see legal fees, some other type of contractual fee, it would be more helpful for us to kind of present it that way rather than trying to jam 4,000, 5,000 individual lines into a report for the board. So my only kind of suggestion or ask is if there's expense, pause for dramatic music. If there are expense lines that you want to see, we can kind of isolate those specifically rather than kind of just presenting every line. Because there are some lines where it'll be $500. I don't think that's kind of what you're looking to get a sense of. I think you're probably looking to get a sense of some of those bigger types of expenses rather than the very, very granular components. So it might be helpful if there are kind of certain types of expenses that the board wants to see, if you could let us know what those would be. I'll take legal expenses being one of them. But yeah, that's sort of my only ask. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty ugly report in 2 weeks.
Okay, sounds good. Up next is Trustee Saunders. You have your hand up.
Yeah, just a quick question. I noticed in the details there's coordinators and consultants, and it's a reduction 2.6%. Does this represent the itinerants and consultants that the board employs? Is this a reduction of them sort of correspond to the reduction in the teaching positions?
Adam?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, to Trustee Saunders. So yes and no. Part of the coordinator and consulting costs are tied to PPFs. So when there are changes in those one-off grants, we tend to change sort of those consulting costs associated with them. So a good example is if we had tutoring costs, we were bringing in tutoring consultants or hiring consultants to take on that tutoring project. That tutoring funding is no longer available for 23-24, so those consultants won't continue in that role, but they might roll into one of the new PPFs that we've received related to reading intervention or math strategy. So it's not 100% tied to average daily enrollment like our classroom teachers are, because there is other funding aside from the Pupil Foundation grant that contributes to the consultant line.
Trustee Saunders? I'm sorry, just through you, Chair. So where would we see the reduction in itinerants? Where would that come out on which line?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So itinerants that are dedicated to schools will also be included in the classroom teacher line.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, Trustee Kennedy, you're up next.
Thank you. Through you, sir. Maybe, Mr. Chair, maybe you can help me on a point of clarification. Just for the rules of asking the questions, can you just show me in the bylaws where I make sure I'm following those rules? What section is it with the 3 minutes and the 2 questions? Where is that?
This is the budget session.
Yes.
This comes under staff reports.
So section.
Staff reports. We do not have a time limit on staff reports for questions. So the way I go about it is give everybody an opportunity to speak in order. So those trustees who have not spoken get the first preference to speak. You follow the same rules. You get one question and a follow-up question. and the clarification, if at all there is one. And we kept going till we get tired of questions.
No, so there's 2 questions total per trustee.
That's not for staff reports.
Oh, it's just at the time you have a question.
We talk about that in different sections. Delegations have got their own set of rules. Action items have their rules. This is staff reports. So you have the opportunity. You have the floor.
I'm just going to find the page here. So I just have a question. Some of the numbers that are a little bit higher. So increase. So occasional teachers, you may have mentioned it. I think I may have missed it. But that one's up about 12%, 848 on the agenda. What is that specifically?
Sorry to interrupt, Trustee, just point of privilege. Can we just see the
Can you
slide?
state your point of privilege?
I'm trying to. Can we please see this? Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Just while you're speaking, I just want to see what the trustees are referencing. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Kennedy.
You might be looking at the report rather than the presentation, but I can speak to occasional teachers.
So in the report, in the budget package, it says 12%, but here it says 0%.
It's
because it's revised, using the revised numbers.
No, it's
Trustee Kennedy, I think you're looking on the expense summary, right?
Yeah.
Okay, on occasional teachers, correct?
Correct.
Right, so over year, so the first one is comparing us to the budget from last year. And then, so we're up 12% over where we had last year's budget, so last year at this time. But from revised estimates, we've pretty much kept it the same until we get a better idea of what we're actually going to come in at. So we raised it up about 850,000 from last year at this time for the budget. And the next one is comparing us to where we were in December. So come December, it looked like our numbers were going to be significantly higher. So that's why we added more money in December for it. And we've kept it the same right now, similar logic to see where we end up with. And that's why there's a difference. So last year, June of last year, we were up 12% from June of last year. We're up 0%, rough, whatever that is, $3,000 from where we were at revised estimates in December.
So why do we think it'll be about 850,000 increase then?
That's
revised numbers.
Unfortunately, that's where the numbers are pointing. It might even be higher. We're just not quite sure until we get our final numbers for this year, and then we'll adjust accordingly in December. So as it stands right now, we're thinking that it's going to be at least what we're budgeting for. We're budgeting for around $8 million, and we're thinking it could come in around that as well. That's part of the problem that we have with what I mentioned earlier with respect to how we're funded. And we're funded for about $5.5 million, but our expense is about $8 million. So.
Thank you, Superintendent Lopes. Trustee Kennedy, you're the only trustee with his hand up there. So you have more questions?
Yeah, so just another question. So we obviously have a reduction of teachers. Are there other, I believe Trustee Sanders made a mention, are there other HCDSB staff that are being reduced as a result of declining enrollment? I know GSN is tied to enrollment. I know all that. But arguably, if you have 1,200 less students than a few years ago, does that mean we have less funding for staff resources here, not in front of students?
Superintendent Lofts? Or Director Klein, you'd like to?
Superintendent. I'm looking at my two superintendents here. I wonder which one, because this is an HR issue and it's a financial issue. So
I'll tag over to Superintendent Ullman.
Go ahead, Superintendent Ullman.
Waiting for the dramatic music to come back. Through you, Chair. I think to answer your question is yes, and that would be directly related to our kindergarten classrooms where we are experiencing a notable amount of not actualized enrollment as anticipated and projected. So that is where we would be laying off ECEs until we actualize that enrollment.
My question was actually about non-teaching staff. So staff who don't teach, who are not in front of students, is there a reduction in non-teaching staff as a result of declining enrollment pending?
Enrollment.
And Mr. Chair, thank you. Aaron, feel free to pipe in as you want. But as I think Superintendent Lofts had indicated earlier, our hiring in the back office is what I'll call it, is not directly tied to enrollment. And if anything, it's actually been not actualized when enrollment has experienced increases. I appreciate that's not our present growth state. But our back office is not proportionally growing when our schools are growing. So there wouldn't really be, and that would probably speak to the lean audit and the pieces that were highlighted there earlier. There really wouldn't be any fat to trim, I guess is all that's to say. I'll leave Aaron to add any further.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. I'll come back to you. I see Trustee Agnew's hand is up. I'll give her a chance. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's sort of along those lines. My question was specific to education assistants. So recognizing that they're not teaching staff, they are in our classrooms, but trying to understand what that might look like from a staffing perspective as far as possible reduction in our EA supports.
Superintendent Lofts.
And through you, Mr. Chair, any reduction we had, we kept everything pretty much static unless there was a reduction in funding. And COVID funding was a reduction that we had that we were funding some of the EAs through in past years. So I don't have the number amount, and I know you might see it going up in the forecast, but that is more due to the change in salaries as well in the EAs. So it is down. It's just not a significant decrease, but it was funded from another pot of money or another source of funding. We did keep it high. If there is a benefit in it, is that we do have vacancies and we're still trying to fill those vacancies on the EA lines.
I think Superintendent Olman wants to add to that. Go ahead.
May I? And sorry, this is the complicated factor of we all have a different stake in all of this. And so from a collective agreement perspective, my requirement to declare, I have declared no EAs laid off. So I can confirm that.
Thank you. Vice Chair, follow up.
Okay, so I appreciate that. Just a further clarification then, and I understand that we have vacancies. Doesn't mean that we don't need that staff. The vacancies are just simply our inability to fill, but it doesn't reduce the fact that those students require those EA support. So I just want to ensure that we continue to meet the needs of those students, both from a success perspective as well as a safety perspective. And I'm hearing that we're not doing any.
The complement there's been no reduction in the EA complement.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back to Trustee Kennedy. Hand is still up. You have the floor.
So a question about trimming non-teaching staff. So we've had 4 years of declines. How many itinerants, consultants, coordinators do we have 4 years ago? We have about 52 now. Did we have less 4 years ago or do we have more now in that specific category?
Who would like to take the question? Superintendent Lofts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, Trustee Kennedy, I do not have that information handy on that level.
I think
Director Klein,
Superintendent Kroll might have that, or
yeah, I can speak for my department. I couldn't give you an exact number, but I do know that there are less curriculum staff than there were 4 years ago. Okay, so we've had to make cuts as was referenced earlier. A lot of it is tied to ministry funding that doesn't exist anymore. But I couldn't give you the number right now, but there has been a decrease in the number of curriculum staff positions over the last 4 years.
Thank you. Trustee Kennedy. Oh, sorry. Superintendent Olman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification on like what I would consider teaching staff. That wouldn't be inclusive of itinerant, consultant, and coordinating staff. Those are OWECTA, so that is the affiliate who represents and is the bargaining agent to represent. So I appreciate they're more centrally staffed, but they would still be teaching staff. So I just wanted to add that point of clarification. So when we're talking about system redundancies, we're looking at all staff within that complement, whether within a school or at a system level. Just wanted to help clarify in case that's valuable.
Thank you, Trustee Kennedy. You have more questions?
Yes. So through you to Superintendent Lofts, you mentioned PPF funding was around $3 million total.
A little bit more. I was just going off the two big ones, which were the math, about $1 million, and the early reading recovery was about roughly $2 million, and then we had about maybe 400 or 500 in other areas. But those are the two big ones in my mind, with the math and the reading recovery.
So, and how much of that would be for professional development?
I might defer this one, Mr. Chair, to my colleagues in those areas.
Who would like to take this?
I think this might be a bit of a knot that's hard to unthread because it's got a lot of different leads to it. So I'm looking at maybe Superintendent Kroll, if you want to take a start.
Yeah, I would say that's an ongoing discussion right now, Trustee Kennedy, and it is something where we would, if we weren't able to fund professional development through that, then we would have to look for other sources of funding.
Thank you. Hold a question. I'm going to Trustee Uhan Chanada because she's not spoken before. So Trustee Uhan Chanada, you have the floor.
Thank you, through you. I just want to mix it up a little bit. Okay. So Superintendent Lofts, this 23-page document, I'm just curious, you know, all the moving pieces, all the different GLs, all the different matrices, how long would this take the board and your staff to put this together and to find the different areas for savings to bring us to the point that we're at now? How many hours of work is this?
Superintendent Lofts.
Months. A lot of late nights to get to this point. Not months in total, but months like 6 weeks. I'm trying to think. We really started. We start, obviously, you see the calendar that we include when we start. We start in February. Well, we start even in November, looking at the projections and stuff. Then we look at all the forecast, the challenges, things like that. But really, once we get the GSNs is when we start. So it's really dependent on that. So we get them later. It really makes it front loaded, right? We have a lot of work to get done in a short period of time. So it's been really since April 17th when the GSNs were announced, we're going pretty good. Pretty good pace.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment because as looking at it and part of our governance is to understand this and really fully understand what goes into this. So I just really thank you for that and your staff, because even to this point after 5 years, and I relatively think I'm fairly intelligent, don't anyone comment on that, that we continue to ask questions to understand. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Uhan. I'll go back to Trustee Kennedy, but you know what? We have been at this for almost an hour and a half, so we'll take just maybe 1 or 2 more questions. And this is a draft. We'll come back to it again. Sorry, 1 second. Any comment from Superintendent Merrick, or I see some hands up there. Okay. Trustee Kennedy will take another couple of questions and then we move on.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I believe Superintendent Kroll mentioned if we didn't have enough for PPF for PD, we would find other resources. So we know it's just over 3 million. We know math is over 1 million. We know there's mental health and there's other items. So once we decline that level, it looks to me like PD is probably $500,000. I mean, we can get that information later, but the difference between getting birthday phone calls, the difference between that number and what we actually spend on PD, which is now going to 5.1 million. Where do we make that up if it's not from PPF? Do we take it out of the GSN?
Superintendent Lofts?
Some of that money this year, sorry, through Mr. Chair to Trustee Kennedy, is we are trying to look at more from that PPF is larger than we've seen, at least at this time of year. So we are using, so when you see it there, that will include PPFs, Trustee Kennedy. So if you see that 5.1, PPFs would be funding that on the other side. So that's only the expense side, but we will be using some of that PPF money to backfill the PD. That's, I think, what Superintendent Kroll was mentioning. We need the PD in those areas, and that's where we're using from. And if we don't have those PPFs, we'd have to find it in other areas of the budget.
Right. Just to add to that, when you see that 5 million in PD, a large portion of that relates to special education and student success, which are GSN funded, but they're enveloped. And within that enveloped funding, the ministry has earmarked a portion of that to only be spent on PD. That's when we tend to get a carryover in terms of utilizing that PD. So there's a significant carryover in the specialized equipment training. So anytime we introduce new specialized equipment for special education students, we need to train not only the student, but the teachers, as well as potentially the EAs and parents associated with that. And it just really depends on how much training we need to get that student comfortable using that product or device versus what we've received funding for. So typically we see a good chunk of enveloped funding related to special education and student success, where it's PD driven. And like I mentioned earlier, we, for budgeting purposes, to allow the department to see their full access of funds, we just roll in the full deferred revenue into the budget so that they know it's there. Whether they spend it is a different story. Like you can see in the report, our actuals as of April, we were only 1 million in PD, right? And we have a budget of 4+ million for it. So in reality, are we going to spend 5 million? No, but it's just sort of the byproduct of the ease of when we're having those discussions with the departments and explaining to them what they have access to. It's easier for us to show the full amount and whether they spend it or not. That just depends on kind of demand, right? If we don't have a lot of specialized equipment being needed in a given year, we're going to have excess funds carry over to another year for that training. So there's a bit of that too in there.
Thank you. Trustee Kennedy, one last question, if you have.
It's a number that I brought up before. I mean, it's up 347% from the expected number from 2021, 2022. You've got declining enrollment. You've got a 300% increase in PD. And my understanding is a lot of that is as teachers are coming out of school, we're backfilling with supply teachers at $300 a day, close to that. And so that's a significant amount. So I just wondered, like with declining enrollment, why is that's the one number that is the highest increase. It keeps continuing to rise.
Yeah.
And, as part of doing our due diligence on the budget, I've asked for reports on the breakdown. I did get a breakdown today with a few hours notice. But they're such round numbers that I don't think they're actually actuals of what's actually being spent. It's what maybe is projected for departments. And is any of that money going to other departments or other PD sessions because it's not being used in a department? That'd be interesting to know. I mean, it really does cover that 1% of making a budget compliant. You look at $5 million.
Yeah, I mean, the PD that we're bringing from deferred, we make a point of netting it to zero. So the expense and the revenue kind of match. So that wouldn't really drive that deficit, but we can look at presenting it in a different way where we carve out kind of that portion that's coming from previous years unspent to show what the true cost that we're funded for this year in the GSN or through PPFs versus what's carried over. That's something that we could relatively easily provide. But yeah, I mean, I just look at the actuals and know that, okay, we're trending the way we've historically trended where we're not utilizing some of that money. But unfortunately, the way that funding is structured, we can't reallocate it. Like I would love to be able to reallocate it to cover off some staffing deficiencies elsewhere, but when it's enveloped, that's what the ministry wants us to spend it on, and we can't really defer from that. There's been times where we've tried to appeal to utilize the funding for other purposes. Sometimes we've been more successful than others. I think Superintendent Kroll has been successful in a couple of instances, and I think we just saw one where we were successful for spec ed going into the summer for this year, but it's not a guarantee. So yeah, it's something that the board would like to see where we're reflecting how much PD costs is in the budget from carryover from last year versus new PD for the current year. We can do that breakdown for the board.
Thank you.
You mentioned envelope. How much of it is envelope? Is it $500,000 roughly? Like you're saying, like it's 5 million.
Yeah.
If it's $500,000. There's a big gap there.
No, it's more than $500,000 that's enveloped and deferred. I don't have the number on the screens, but I can provide that information. It's typically from a spec ed perspective, I think we're in and around like 700,000 in costs that we defer every year related to specialized equipment. For student success, again, there's multiple components within that, but we're in and around $1 million for student success components. And we also use PD as sort of the default. So when we don't have the actual funding agreement yet, rather than putting that cost in, let's say, a salary account or something, it's been our school board strategy to put the placeholder in professional development. That way it's easy. We know when we're looking at these PPFs to go to certain expense categories for all of them, to then do the allocation once we see that physical agreement. And that's just been where we put it. I mean, other school boards may put it in supplies and services or a different category. I think that's just historically where we've parked those costs until we get the agreement. So it's challenging, right? Like the province has announced about, like in total, we're about 6 million in PPF funding for 23-24, but we haven't seen a single agreement. So we don't know what the requirements of that funding are at this point. So it's just placeholders where we're putting in the costs to match the funding, and we'll address it once we see the actual document. And then you'll see more of that in the revised estimates that we bring back in November, because at that point we'll have seen the transfer payment agreements for those PPFs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, trustees, for your questions. Superintendent Lofts.
I just need to add one part, and I heard Trustee Kennedy mention, Mr. Chair, about the 600,000 or so to be compliant. I just want to remind trustees that we've already saved that money. We've already paid for that money in the past. So we'd be essentially double counting if we're that concerned about that $600,000 compliance level. So just something to remember and remind trustees.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent Lofts. So thank you, trustees, for the questions. And I want to really appreciate Superintendent Lofts and Senior Manager Cross and your team behind the scene who have been working hard on this, to bring this draft budget here. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we look forward to the final submissions. In the meantime, if trustees have questions, please feel free to approach Superintendent Lofts and his team, and they will help you out. We now move on to our next order of business, which is information reports. 11.1, student trustee updates. I see only one student trustee here. Trustee Kuzma, you have the floor.
Thank you, and through Mr. Chair. Quick report. Hopefully there's not as many questions for this item. So starting off with achieving, at our May 25th General Senate meeting at Holy Trinity, we had Maximum City attend to facilitate an amazing discussion on what the students were looking for in the multi-year strategic plan. We had many insightful conversations with the students and look forward to seeing the next steps in the planning process. As well, the Senate selection process is underway. So incoming student trustees and staff are hard at work selecting the members of the 2023-2024 Student Senate. Appointments will be released prior to our final General Senate meeting, which I think is next Thursday. And at that meeting, elections will be held for leadership positions. Moving on to the believing section, June, as the month of Sacred Heart of Jesus, is a special time in many of our schools. We're beginning to see themed prayers, devotions, and liturgies by our chaplaincy staff to commemorate this special month, as well as efforts for almsgiving and special initiatives to celebrate Jesus' mercy and love. As well, many schools celebrated the May crowning of Mary, and at the end of the month, with the praying of the Rosary and other special prayers, assemblies, and Marian liturgies. Moving on to belonging, over the past week, we're very excited to see many flag-raising ceremonies and events to commemorate the beginning of Pride Month. These displays of inclusion mean so much to the many students of our board, and we look forward to seeing the continued efforts throughout the month to promote safe, belonging, and welcoming environments in our schools. On May 31st, many of our schools celebrated Red Shirt Day to promote awareness for National Accessibility Week. We thank the many of our lead senators and staff who helped coordinate these events. The Special Education Subcommittee's Embracing IEPs campaign has been underway, and daily posts have been put up on the @HCDSB Senate Instagram to promote IEPs and their importance in our schools. So everyone go check those out. We commend the committee for their efforts to promote and spread awareness of these issues for special education in our schools. As well, on May 23rd, St. Francis Xavier hosted the Student Equity Symposium, and keynote speakers Dr. Ann Lopez and Wally Shaw. The day-long events featured two speakers and many breakout sessions on a variety of topics. Special thank you to Britta Badur, Peace Universal, Zigwen Mixamong, Wally Shaw, Ann Lopez, and Micah J. Mullen, as well as Taliba Howard and Sarah Agamiri for helping facilitate these breakouts. Finally, on May 30th, 2023, the GSA, Gay Straight Alliance students from all across the HCDSB gathered for our first annual GSA retreat. Students enjoyed gathering with one another, spending a day full of fun, education, and pride. One student noted that it's events like these that make students feel seen and heard within our board. We hope that in the future we can foster more safe spaces and events where students from across the board with different backgrounds and identities can come together and connect, creating belonging environments for all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kuzma, for bringing the report on behalf of other trustees who are not here, Trustee Govind, Trustee Chua. Trustees, do we have any questions for Trustee Kuzma? Seeing no hands up, Trustee Kuzma, thank you so much for bringing the report to the board and appreciate your work. We shall now move on to our next information report, which is item 11.2, Director's Report. Director Klein, please present your report.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen. Talk amongst yourselves. I was going to say. Elizabeth, can you pull that up? I'm having trouble getting this. Whoop, what's that? It's not even presenting as it usually should. I'll just ask you to do the click aheads. I've got it here. I just can't put it on there. Are you good, or should I just? It's not. I got it. I think that's it. Is that me there? I'm there. Awesome. I got it. I got it. I got it. You should see me with the TV. It's not. It's not. I'll go slide by slide. It's not. It won't. Yeah, try. Right, I'll just go ahead. I think we got it here. So sorry for this. Try. Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, and you can move that ahead here. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry for that. I'll speak quickly, and I'll also recognize the fact that Trustee Kuzma really stole a bit of my thunder, and I won't repeat what he said in terms of some of the things that has been going on at our schools over May and into June. We'll begin again, as we usually do, just overview of achieving, believing, belonging, and the foundational elements, and we'll move on from there. So the Delft, which is not a Dutch pottery, Delft is those words there that I'm not going to try and say. The government of France has provided opportunities for certification in the French language for international candidates through an official diploma called Delft. This is something that has grown really in all boards over the last 10 plus years. And what it does is it gives students an international kind of a consistent metric of facility en français that would then help them in many areas. So for instance, if you want to work in parts of Francophonie, let's say your son or daughter wants to get a job somewhere in France, then they would have to attain one of these levels. This is an internationally kind of recognized set of levels. I think B1 would be the one to kind of get you your foot in the door in terms of some of those jobs in Francophone countries outside of Canada. For students to qualify for this Delft diploma, they have to complete one of 4 exams based on their level of proficiency. And again, we've got A levels and B levels. Successful students must achieve at least 50 points out of 100 in each of the reading, listening, writing, and speaking zones or areas. But 240 students that have been challenged in this. All secondary sites are represented, and 184 candidates of 240 have been successful. We also have, and this is sometimes a challenge at boards, is you need to have trained teacher correctors within that. So you have to be trained in DELF, and so that you can then be someone who can administer these exams. That takes place over the summer, and we have, I would consider that, from where I come from, a healthy number of teachers who would administer that. And of course, when they do the training, they're doing that over the summer months, which is something that we do appreciate from them. Lots going on in May and into June in terms of the month of May faith focus, and Trustee Kuzma already talked a bit about what's going on in some of our schools. One of the goals of our theological theme this year is to reacquaint our students and staff with some of the traditional and favorite devotions of the church. And May, of course, is perfect in terms of focus on Mary, our mother. And of course, we had May crowning Mary, the feast days of Mary, mother of the church, the visitation of the Blessed Virgin Mary to Elizabeth, which I think was last week. Students at Corpus Christi investigated the history, beginning with Shout in Cathedral, good place to get your DELF, and then created the labyrinth in their school chapel. We know that that's a very ancient tradition in the European Church of prayer and meditation. Arriving at the center leads one to gaze upon the risen Christ on the crucifix. Preparation for the month of June, we've shared instruction also about the history and development, devotion of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. We've introduced the Miraculous Medal of Catherine Labouré, and many other schools have regular Rosary Club meetings. I was very pleased to receive information and, I guess, connection with Terry Fox Foundation, which I think pretty much 100% of Canadians would have an understanding of, and many people outside of Canada, I think, now too. And that was a missive that congratulated us for all the work that our students and schools have done, not only the past year, but over the years. So $41,000 was raised just for the Terry Fox run at our schools. 43 of them took or participated in that. And over the years, the schools in this region have raised over $1 million, $1.2 million, and that goes directly to research for that. And there are a few people in this room, I think, who might have a memory of actual Terry Fox and seeing him on TV, as he, I think, showed us great courage. I just like this from the foundation. I just thought I'd add it here. He pushed himself to the limit, both physically and mentally, to help find a cure for cancer, while setting an example of perseverance, empathy, courage, and never giving up. Values that are still so relevant today. These are the lessons that are especially important in schools. We're humbled that educators choose to use Terry as an avenue to teach. Observances during the month of June. Of course, it's a month dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Just saw from Archbishop Leo to a communique on that. Came up through Oxta. June is National Indigenous History Month in Canada. There's a lot going on in June. June is designated Pride Month, we know as well. June is Filipino Heritage Month as well in this, and each of these talks a bit about the activities that are taking place. Multi-year strategic plan, as Trustee Kuzma reminded us, is no less a focus as we head into June. And we know that the Senate is just visited by Maximum City, and I know that SEAC has, and CPIC was, and so we're moving through those as well. And Father Larry yesterday was saying how their deanery is looking forward to that as well, and they'll have a chance to engage them. Board of Trustees, of course, we know has been engaged, and they have begun the consultation process, and we are invited as a community, all of us, to share feedback in the NYSP consultation survey, which begins this week and will go through to the end of this month. I do want to add one more thing for my friend Trustee Carabella, because there was a question that was asked a while ago and I didn't have an answer for you, and I promised that I would put it in here now. The question was around consent for some of our employees and our professionals to work with children and how the communication works within that. And so I did ask Superintendent Rossini to give me a bit of feedback on that, and not that it is restricted to what she does, but she has noted that if we as a board refer a child to community mental health services, and we have MOUs, memorandums of understanding, with all those stakeholders and partners with us, parents are informed of the referral, and it's up to the community agency then to get that informed consent. Another thing to know is that informed consent is completed by registered professionals. We have registered professionals here at our school board, I think you're all aware of, not least of whom are our social workers and psychologists and speech and language, and all of those would get informed consent as well, child and youth care workers as well. The purpose of informed consent is to ensure that the parent and guardians are aware of the service that their child will receive. Informed consent includes review of the privacy and confidentiality. You can imagine there's many, many rules. Each of those professions has similar but sometimes unique rules in terms of records management, depending on where you are in terms of healthcare providing or not. And the service is voluntary, and that parents and guardians can choose to withdraw consent. Parent is always aware of the reason for the referral through the informed consent process. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Klein, for presenting your report. Trustees, do we have any questions for Director Klein? Trustee Carabella, is your hand up? You have the floor.
Thank you, Director Klein, for getting back to me on that. I appreciate it. I have another question. It's just that I received some notices from parents that they were choosing to keep their children home on June 1st during the raising of the Pride flag. So at this time, I'd like to inquire about our absences that we experienced at our schools on June 1st. Were the absences up, and was there a difference between or for high school and elementary schools? Thank you.
Director Klein?
I think that's a good question for me to get back to you on. I don't know. I was wondering the same thing myself, to be honest, but I don't have the answer.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella, you have another question?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, trustees. Do we have any other questions for Director Klein? Seeing none, thank you, Director Klein, for presenting your report, which is appreciated. We move on to the next information item, 11.3, long-term capital plan, final report and community feedback. Superintendent Lofts, please present your report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. We're very pleased to present with you, with all the trustees, Halton Catholic District School Board long-term capital plan, final report and feedback that looks at our capital needs for the next 15 or so years. I'd like to acknowledge actually Dylan Ganasakara, our supervisor, or sorry, not supervisor, our manager of planning, and Bronco Vidovic. Bronco's not here tonight, but he also participated and did a lot of work on this report as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Dylan and Mr. Chair, and he's going to kind of walk us through the changes from the last time we met regarding this long-term capital plan.
Go ahead. Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees. So the purpose of this report is to provide you with the community feedback we received to date on the new 2023 long-term capital plan and present the finalized LTCP. So since the draft 2023 LTCP was released back in April, staff have held 2 public and stakeholder meetings, and we've conducted an online feedback survey. In total, we received 207 responses to the survey. For the responses, 76% overall agreed or felt neutral that the accommodation issues they felt were important to them were addressed, and 79% felt that they agreed or felt neutral that the accommodation information was clearly identified in this new document. We do provide a summary of the comments and then the staff responses to those comments in, I believe it's, you scroll down 2 more pages, it's provided. Yep, so starting here, we provide the comments based on theme of the comments and then the staff responses. In Appendix C, we provide the full list of all the comments that were submitted as well for you to review. Since the draft LTCP was shared with the community, board staff have made further changes to the LTCP, that's shared with you today. So some of the changes are the enrollment projections have been reviewed and adjusted. We've added information on Thomas Merton ALC to this document. We've updated the community partnership information. There was a reference to proposed South Milton French immersion review that we have included, so that we've corrected that to specify that that is for the elementary panel only. We've also updated some facility information, and then some adjustments were made just for data clarity. So the final long-term capital plan is posted on our school planning website, and there's a link within this board report to take you to that document. We will use this document over the next 5 years for accommodation planning at the board, and staff will update this annually to reflect enrollment and demographic changes over the next 5-year period. Yeah, so the 2023 long-term capital plan process is now complete. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Dylan. Trustees, do we have questions for Mr. Gunasekara? No questions. I see a hand up there. Trustee Carabella, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that report. I know it's super dense, and I have to admit it was just along with the budget, and to go through it, it's very difficult. But are we able to, think we were allowed to have certain things printed? Is it going to be accessible on the website somewhere, the long-term capital plan? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we do have the document on, if you click on that link there, schoolplanning.acdsb.org /LTCP, that will take you to the website, and we will have a link to the entire document and then each of the sections. But if any of the trustees would like a printed copy, we can provide that as well.
Thank you. Trustee Carabella, you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella, and I see no other hands up. So with that, I just want to thank Superintendent Lofts and your team, Dylan and Branko and everyone in the back. Thank you. Good job. Taken some time, but well done. Thank you. With that, we shall move on to the next information report, provincial consolidation of school board financial statements. Accountant's report with respect to the 7-month period from September 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023. Superintendent Lofts, please present a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Please find attached, everyone, the provincial consolidation of school board financial statement accountants report for the 7-month period, as Chair Dort just mentioned. This report is required by the province to align with their March 31st year end. So it's almost like a mini year end for us. The province's year end is March 31st, and we must consolidate our numbers up into the province's numbers. So this report was successfully filed with the Ministry of Education, May 15th, 2023 on a due date. Adam Cross, our Senior Manager of Financial Services, or I, are available to answer any questions relating to it. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent Lofts. Trustees, do we have questions for Superintendent Lofts? Seeing none, thank you, Superintendent Lofts, for presenting your report. And with that, we shall move on to our next order of business, which is correspondence. Miscellaneous items. We don't have anything there.
Oh.
Sorry, Trustee Carabella.
There was the item I took out of the consent agenda.
Yeah. What was that? I think I made a note of it somewhere. Sorry, which one's 6.2.7. Oh, yes. 6. Halton Student Transportation Services, HSTS, annual home to school transportation. It's information items. It's under information items. We are under miscellaneous information. So did we miss that? Oh. Oh, sorry, trustees. My apologies here. We missed item 11.7. which is Halton Student Transportation Services Annual Home to School Transportation Review. Could we have that up on the screen? Okay. Trustee Carabella?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had one or two questions about it because transportation of students to schools is very important to parents and that. So one of the schools that I was looking at, of course, I represent Oakville, so I was looking at my schools and some routes that have been now deemed that they're taking them away because of a new assessment on why they were allowed in the first place, maybe due to traffic or things changing. And so I wanted to ask for a greater detail why the eligibility that was once granted no longer remains. And then I was going to ask when parents would be notified of this.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. I'll pass this to Superintendent Lofts, who's on the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Trustee Carabella. So yeah, this is similar to every year where we bring these reports forward. So what happens is HSTS, so Halton Student Transportation Services, will look through and look for changes, traffic calming, lights that have been put in the area, some kind of reason or something that's changed from where it was, the reason why it was exempted before. So I believe we have 7 for September of 2023. St. Dominic, Nicholas has 2 routes, Marguerite, St. Pat's is Burlington, Rayfields is Burlington, and St. Catherine, Halton Hills. And then for 2024, we have 2, Holy Rosary, Milton, and St. Dominic's again. Notification. So typically in the past, so last year when we did the same thing, we did it around this time, we only gave 1-year notification. So they were informed in June and then in the fall. This year, the majority is the same. So we have the 7 for September of 2023. So they'll be notified the first week or so of June. They'll be getting the notification that the route's no longer there. And then the ones for 2024, we gave 2 for 2024. The reason essentially for what they did was because it was more of a warning just due to the location to say, give the parents, in this case, it was maybe a larger change. So HSTS thought, you know what, we'll give the warning this year saying, hey, this year it's here, next year though it might not be. So that at least is the information, that's being given for the parents. The reason why is like I mentioned before, Trustee Carabella, they went through the list of all, and it's not just our board either, it's both boards that are being impacted. So.
Thank you, Trustee Carabella. You have another question.
And if a parent would like explanation or there's an appeal process, that's outlined for them and through the HSTS.
Yes, Superintendent Lofts.
That's correct,
Okay.
Trustee Cabral. There's yes, through the HSTS, it's appeal process there.
Thank you. No further questions there. So we shall move on to our next order of business, which is miscellaneous items. We have nothing there. Correspondence, we have nothing. Open question period. Director Klein, do you have any questions submitted for the open question period? I'd like to know the eligibility, whether it meets the requirements for. Right. So.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Again, noted with the eligibility for the questions, the bylaws do state that those need to have name, address, and telephone number of the questioner. That's not to say that those who've sent something in without that won't get a response. But if you're wondering, then that was something that might have been missing from a questioner. We did have one that came in, and it goes like this. This is earlier this afternoon. 1, what accommodation does the board intend to make in the event that biological females do not feel safe with biological males who identify as female entering into female-only spaces such as washrooms or change rooms? Question 2. Sorry?
Director Klein, we will answer the question 2 at the same time?
No, we're not. But,
okay.
I thought I'd just.
Yeah. The thing is, I need to make sure that it meets the requirements. If it does not meet the requirements, they get a response from your office.
Right.
So we'll take the questions that meet the requirements.
Name, address, telephone number?
Yep, everything, yes.
That's what I'm doing. Second, as the board has communicated a commitment to creating safe spaces for all students, what will be the board's policy for ensuring staff and student safety in the situation presented in question 1 above. That's something that we would be taking back to work on an answer.
Thank you, Director Klein. So the responses will be sent by your office to the individuals who sent you the questions. And the eligible questions which are eligible and meet the requirements will be responded to and be in the minutes of the next or subsequent board meeting. Correct? Thank you, Director Klein, for the open question period. In camera, next order of business, we have to go back in camera. May I have a motion to move back in camera?
I'll move it.
Moved by Trustee Hearn Janada. Looking for a seconder. Trustee Murphy. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Trustee Saunders opposed? Anybody else opposed?
I'm going to be opposed.
I'll take this to a recorded vote. We are voting on going back in camera, item number 15. Trustee Saunders, you are opposed. Trustee Kelly?
In favor.
Trustee Kuzma?
In favor.
Trustee Carabella?
Opposed.
Trustee Powell?
In favor.
Trustee Kennedy?
In favor.
Trustee Ohonchanara?
In favor.
Trustee Agnew?
In favor.
Trustee Murphy?
I'm sorry, can you clarify what we're voting on?
We're voting on going in camera.
Favor.
Trustee Saunders and Trustee Duarte is in favor. We have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We have 7 in favor, 2 opposed. Motion carries. We have to go back in camera. We'll take a quick break of 5 minutes. It's 10:25, 10:30. We'll recoup. Thank you so much. Please sign out of this.